Welcome in the latest episode of That SEC Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Bratton. I go by SEC Mike on Twitter. And we're here one final time to recap SEC Media Days. We got Tennessee. We got South Carolina. We got Ole Miss to close out the event. Finally caught up on everything I missed. And, oh yeah, a lot of interviews. This is going to be another Mondo one. We got Austin Price and Eric Kainer from VolQuest. Cain also the host of the Locked On Vols podcast. South Carolina, we got a trio of guys. Ben Portnoy from the State, Mike Uva from Gamecock Central, and Chris Phillips, Spurs Up Show. Ole Miss, we got our buddy Michael Katz, and then two all-SEC interviews to round out the week. J.D. Pickall from On 3 does a hell of a job. It's great meeting him. And our buddy Chad Withrow, host of Hot Mic on Outkick. So let's just get right into the action. Loaded show. And got to start with them Tennessee Vols coming off an 11-win season. A lot of buzz there in Nashville with Josh Heupel, Joe Milton. I had actually heard Joe Milton got more interview requests than Josh Heupel, believe it or not. So just a ton of buzz with the Vols. Can they keep it rolling? Most people think they can. I'm about to find out. And there's two common themes with the Vols. People questioning them, thinking it was a one-hit wonder. Hendon Hooker, Jalen Hyatt, Cedric Tillman, Darnell Wright off to the NFL. Tennessee's going to take a step back. That's what some people think. Other people think, hell, no one had Tennessee winning 11 games last year, yet they got that done. Won the Orange Bowl. Some people have them as the second best team in the country when Hendon Hooker was healthy. No one saw that coming. So can they take that next step with a defense that should be better, deeper, more talented? A lot of running backs back. You may not know all the names at receiver, but they're probably deeper as a receiving core this year than they've ever been under Josh Heupel. And I really thought Tennessee fans would appreciate this question. What's it going to take to close that gap? Josh Heupel's done it as a player. He's won a national championship. What's it going to take for Tennessee to get there? Let's kick it over to Josh Heupel.
A couple times today how hungry your football team is and not satisfied from last year. As a player, you won a national championship. What will you try to impart to them about the challenge of going from where you are now to the top of the mountain?
Yeah, when we first started, we were way behind, and in some simple steps, you can make up, big ground, yards at a time, let's say. And the higher you get, the tougher it is, the more attention to detail, the more the nuances are of what you're trying to make up. They become inches, and the inches are tougher to make up than the yards are. And being real transparent and open with them about where we're at and where we got to get to. And our guys have worked extremely hard. There's been a heightened sense of urgency. You can see that in the weight room. You can see it on the field, in the meeting room. You can see it in their off-the-field behavior. Now, we've had 3 good phases, 3 good quarters of offseason. We got another one left. We got to have a great training camp, and then you got to be able to reset and play week to week. You don't have to be the best team in the country week one. You got to be better than the team you're playing every week, and that's got to be the mission.
Now, they're obviously not going to win any championships playing defense like they did against South Carolina. I mean, everybody's making that joke all off season long. I get it. But I think, and we've been preaching it on this show, the defense for Tennessee has gotten better. Of the 12 FBS teams they played last year, Tennessee held 9 of them under their average total. And we're talking teams like LSU, Georgia, Kentucky, Clemson. These are not jokes of teams. Missouri, throw them in there too. Shut out Vanderbilt. So it's not like Tennessee's defense is god-awful. They were god-awful for one game, sure, but that's the one everyone remembers. Josh Heupel on what it's going to take for Tennessee not to have that South Carolina-type performance. Take that next step. They're probably never going to be the stronger side of the ball. Let's not kid ourselves under Josh Heupel, but as long as they are a capable unit, force some turnovers, get to the quarterback, Tennessee's going to be one hell of a dangerous team.
Yeah, Coach, you guys had an electric offense last year. You were able to constantly put up points. You had several track meets, it seemed like, last year. But defensively, there did seem to be some struggles there where you had a lot of those high-scoring games. This year, what kind of is the focus to allow the defense to continue to build as well? And where are you guys trying to improve most to be able to have as much bite as your offense does?
Yeah, year 1 to year 2, we took a lot of great strides defensively, too. In particular, effectiveness against the run. We became top 20 defense in that statistically. I think we were first or second in 0 negative yard plays in turnovers. So there's a lot of positives. In the games that we didn't play where we're capable of, we got to get better defending the pass, and we got to do a better job on third downs, really third and longs, 3rd and 7+. And both of those things are affected by, playing elite in the secondary, right? Your corners, your safeties. A year ago, no excuses. We were banged up. That was in spring ball. It was in training camp. It was during the course of the season. We got to stay healthy. We have more competition. I think that lends itself to us taking a step on that in that area. And then you also have to be able to affect the quarterback, not just with pressures, but with your front four. And through addition of personnel and development under Coach Gardner and Coach Eckler, I feel like we made a stride there too. So the anticipation that I have for our defense is to take another step to play elite defense. That will happen while we're there, and looking forward to seeing it. We got great leadership. Believe in Coach Banks, our defensive staff, and I love the guys that we have on that side of the football. Our personnel has done a great job this offseason. Think and know that we'll take another step.
Coach, thank you very much.
And then last but not least, I couldn't not play this one. Little Mike Leach story here from Coach Heupel. Mike Leach, if you don't know, recruited Heupel to Oklahoma. The year they won the national championship, Mike Leach was no longer on staff. I believe he was, maybe that's when he got his first head coaching job or something. I can't remember, but I know he left there. But still, they remained close, and a lot of what Heupel's system is based on, the passing concepts at least, come from Mike Leach's system that he learned their first year together at Oklahoma.
Wanted to ask about Mike Leach. At one point during the season last year, I spoke with Coach Leach, and he talked about your offense and a couple of plays looking very familiar. So I wanted to ask you maybe your best Mike Leach story, sir.
I'm sure he had something to say about my athleticism during that comment too. Man, Mike, I talked to him 3 weeks before his passing about there, and like most conversations, put the phone on the table, put it on speaker, and just kind of listen. My wife was shaking her head, but full of stories, and had a great night with him. A year while he was sitting out of football. I was in Norman at the time, but he came back and talked with the offensive staff in particular, and we had a great night going out and having fun and just kind of sharing stories. You guys know he's a great storyteller and one of the great personalities in college football. Changed the way the game was played on a wide spectrum, being able to see the game played in space, which it currently is.
And also, I had to play this clip too. Joe Bilton asked, how far can he throw that ball? He's not even sure how far he can sling that damn pigskin.
Mobile, Alabama. I know in the summertime you work on your game constantly, but at the Manning Passing Academy, you were able to launch an absolute rocket close to 80 yards, standing still. What is the furthest you've thrown and feel comfortable throwing the football?
I actually don't know the furthest I can throw the ball. I kind of just let it go. It's a mindset thing. Once you, as a quarterback, once you feel like, somebody's too far, then they're going to be too far from you, right? I kind of just let it go, no matter where they at.
I just had to play that one. And I have to throw it to, great interview here, Austin Price. Man, this is a long time coming. I've been a huge, huge fan of Austin and the Volcrest crew for years and years and years. Really kind of surreal that I get to actually interact with these people and exchange text messages and whatnot with them. But let's kick it over. First time on the show, Austin Price from VolQuest. It's an honor. Austin Price, VolQuest, the go-to site for all things Tennessee. Austin, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, appreciate it. We can just talk Morristown East and Jeff County football in the next 15 minutes.
I thought we were in Hardee's there for a minute.
let me ask you, Austin. How big of a fan are you of Mark Stoops in Kentucky football? I know that's one of your favorites there.
Well, I mean, I think he's done a phenomenal job. He got mad when he was on the Nation one year, because I referenced, how far he's brought them. And he was just tired of that narrative. And I'm like, how do you get tired of the narrative that you've done a good job? I mean, they were a doormat forever, and all of a sudden they were really competitive. I think they're going to be much more competitive this year.
Yeah.
Like, they're my team that I'm not sure that it equates in wins, but I think that they will be the fly in somebody's ointment, because I think Leary is a really solid quarterback, and I think that you had putting Cohen back up there. I just think that Kentucky will be more formidable this year than they ever were a year ago.
I think that's the nicest thing I've ever heard you say about Kentucky.
I'm just a straight shooter. I kind of call it like I see it. So, I mean, again, I think he's done a phenomenal job. I do think there's a ceiling there. I think it gets harder now that he's going to be going into a schedule that, isn't necessarily conducive with a Mississippi State every year. It will get harder. And, I think everybody's kind of got him pigeonholed for that Iowa job because he played up there whenever Ferentz gets out, if he wants to coach that long. My thing is, Stoops, he's kind of got some other, interests outside of football that he's doing. And so how long does he want to stay in coaching, or is he more like his brother who wants to get out at a decent age and enjoy life? Because he seems like Stoops feels like to me a guy that would be really fun to just go for a weekend trip with. Seems like a genuinely good guy who just, again, got tired of the narrative that Kentucky had, improved a lot.
Yeah. Do you share a bank account with your father, like some Tennessee assistants?
No.
Allegedly?
No, I do not.
Can you believe that? Could you believe that? That was the excuse?
If you're trying to protect and you're trying to come up with a good reason, I mean, I've heard worse tales. So I'm not totally surprised that was kind of the avenue, trying to protect himself, trying to protect Jeremy and get out as clean as one can get out of that mess.
Yeah. Now that's over them, though. I mean, they just landed a 5-star, Mike Matthews.
Sure.
There's probably more coming. How big? I mean, Tennessee was already in the fast lane, so to speak. How much quicker, faster can they get there now that they don't have this crap hanging over them?
Well, I don't think it's really hung over them this year. I think it hung over them that 22 year when it was the Dallin Hayden, Ty Simpson, Jordan James, Isaiah Horton, all those in-state kids, and really all the kids in that class, but specifically the in-state kids, because you're around it every day. You're around Tennessee fans every day and Tennessee media every day, and you hear about this and that. And all these schools, I had numerous recruits that year tell me that schools were saying 4-year show calls or 4-year bowl ban, 5-year bowl ban, and kids, Tennessee couldn't go, that's not true.
Yeah.
You couldn't officially say that because you don't know. And if you're a parent or a kid and you're really ignorant on how it all works, who are you going to believe, the team that's under investigation or the team that's not? And so, it really hampered them that first year. I think there are several, and I've talked to several people that look at Tennessee and think, if I had known that they were going to flip it, things would be different.
Yeah.
But they're not. And Tennessee's moved on, and they moved on nicely. And again, I don't think it's hampered them this year. I think it was important for Heupel and company to be on the phone, and they were. I mean, the moment it got released, Hype's on the phone with all these different recruits, especially the ones that were set to announce this week, next week, making them understand, hey, I'm going to fill in the blanks. Here's what all this means. You don't feel it. Hype talked about that when he met with the media here in Nashville. The recruits haven't felt this, just like the fans don't feel it. The fans didn't know that there were no recruits at the 2 Thursday openers the last 2 years. Fans don't feel the $8 million fine. Fans don't know that, Tennessee can't make recruiting phone calls for a week. They don't see any of that stuff. The only thing they feel, and really the only thing that recruits feel to a degree, is the bowl ban, and Tennessee didn't get that. They won't feel the rest of the stuff. Tennessee might feel a little bit when you're looking at being at 82 versus 85. I know that's only 3, but if you're thin at a position and you have some injuries, those 3 extra scholarships could have been 3 extra safeties or defensive tackles or whatever. But I don't think the common person, the common fan, or the common recruit feels any of this.
Do you think they make up for that though? Maybe with NIL,
Could.
helping some of these kids, these preferred walk-ons.
Yeah, it absolutely could. I mean, I think you've seen that a lot across college football, where a high-end player who could probably be a group of five, a high-end group of five player, ends up, instead of signing group of five, ends up walking on through NIL and basically is a scholarship guy at Power 5 programs.
Yeah.
And you see how it goes for a couple of years, and that kid may go, I just want to play, and I'm going to go back to the group of five. Or he may be very content, or he may develop and end up being a Power 5 player. Either way, I think it behooves, all teams to use NIL if they're able to, if they have enough cash to get it all going, to pay for a handful of kids that would normally be walk-ons, but then basically on scholarship through NIL.
Right.
How uniquely positioned is Tennessee with this incredible fan base? Hell, they filled that Neyland Stadium when the team was garbage, and now they're elite. I mean, I didn't see 11 wins coming. I don't know about you. I thought best case scenario last year 9. You got a fan base dying for wins. You're right, getting close to the cusp. NIL, Spire Sports leading the way. Is Tennessee uniquely positioned to win a national championship in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think that you have to have so much luck involved. I mean, look at the Georgia teams that couldn't get past Alabama. And those were really good teams. Yeah. And now, I mean, they've won 2 back-to-back. But, I mean, there were some Georgia teams that easily could have won it. Phillips had teams at Tennessee in the 90s and in early 2000s that were good enough to do it, but they, failed to win this game or that game, and it was a stumbling block. So, I mean, who knows if they can get there. I think that they're positioned to be a factor, and I think that that's a good thing for Tennessee. I mean, you talk about not seeing it coming. Nobody saw it coming. Nobody could sit there and say last year they thought that they were going to win 10-plus games. Not honestly. I mean, like, they hadn't won more than 8 in a regular season since 2007. I mean, I was fresh out of college, and, you were, in college, and you were fresh out of college too. So, I mean, like, now I'm 40. So, I mean, like, they're you know what I mean? Like, it's like, I mean, I just, it was such a long time. Even Butch's good teams, which were, full of Tennessee players, right? He hit on that first glass. He got lucky that Dobbs kind of fell in his lap. And then, finally got on the field after, he was a bad player. He couldn't play in practice. Then he got on the field and he balled, and he had Cam Sutton. But then a lot of those other teams were, Josh Malone, Jalen Hurd, Derek Barnett, Todd Kelly Jr., who, didn't play professionally. But when you go back, I mean, Todd Kelly Jr.'s got like a dozen picks. I mean, Warren Burrell's played 3+ years as a starter at corner. He has as many picks as you and I. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, like, Todd Kelly Jr. was a player. I mean, he didn't play professionally, but he played at a pretty high level in the SEC as far as being a playmaker. So, you look at those teams, they still found ways to lose games. And so to be able to get to that point where you finally got over the hump and you won those games, you won 11, can they do that again this year? Can they build upon that and not just be a flash in the pan?
Yeah. And I know you're really high on Joe Milton and what he can do in this offense. The buzz is growing again. What's realistic expectations for Milton?
I think if I've said it the last month or two, if Joe Milton can play well and be Tennessee goes 9-3, 10-2, he's gonna he's gonna be elite at his pro day. I mean, the intangible or the physical tools are gonna be jumping off the page. So I think he's top 15 pick, maybe even a top 10 pick at that point. If that happens, I think, for Joe, it's just about settling it in and having the lows not be that low. If that happens, I think that, Tennessee's going to win some football games this year. I think the start is key. I think Tennessee's going to beat Virginia, and they'll be undefeated. Everybody wants to talk about UTSA. Hype's done a pretty good job of, they take care of the business against, the lesser teams. It's beating Florida for the first time in Gainesville since 2003. You do that. I've said this a handful of times. If you told Heupel, you only get one win, but you get to pick it, and you get to pick it by as much as you want to win by, I think he's picking South Carolina.
Oh, I'm glad you went there.
I think
thought you were teeing up Florida. I was like,
no, I think he's picking South Carolina. So, okay, let's say you win that one. Then the X Factor game's A&M. Like, what are they? And I think by second week of October, you kind of have an idea. Is this marriage between, Petrino and Jimbo going to work? And if it does, then that's a really tough game. If it's not, then, Tennessee's got a chance to win that one, be undefeated. They've got a chance to win that game regardless. But I think it becomes a little more cloudy if A&M, because A&M, I think talent-wise is just about as good as anybody in the league.
Right.
And so I think that's an X factor game. I think Tennessee can win at Alabama this year, but again, that's doing something for the first time since '03, since Tennessee won that 5 overtime game down there with Casey Clausen on 4th and 17 to C.J. Phaeton. Again, doing things that you hadn't done in a while. They did them last year. Who's to say they can't do them this year?
if it's clear and sunny when Georgia comes to town, do you think maybe there's a shot that they beat the Georgia Bulldogs?
Well, I mean, again, with this offense, I think it's possible to do anything, especially if your quarterback is dealing. And who's to say that Joe don't have that type of day? Now, Joe could also have one of those kind of clunker games, and Tennessee loses a game they shouldn't. But I think that again, managing his highs and lows, and Georgia, everybody doubted them last year to a degree, right? They knew they were going to be a playoff team, but I'm not sure anybody thought that they were going to do what they did and just roll everybody. I'm sure they're going to try to manufacture that they've been left behind again, and little old Georgia's not predicted. But Georgia will be picked to win the East by a landslide. Right. And, again, what does their quarterback position look like? I mean, Stetson Bennett, for all the detractors and naysayers, he just played, man. I mean, he made a ton of good throws. I mean, he was super crafty. And, again, nothing was flashy. He just did it.
Right. I want to ask, because Nico, obviously a hot name there in Knoxville, and you think about some of the games last year that maybe Hooker, you're saying, why is he not pulled yet? Do you think we got a little bit of a shorter leash? I mean, not saying that Milton's going to be in trouble or anything like that, but I'm saying if we get a nice sizable lead, do you think we get Nico in there sooner than maybe years past?
Yeah, I do think that they're going – I don't think they're going to worry about, let's only play him in 4 games because we're going to redshirt him. No one expects Nico to be here 5 years, right? Mm-hmm. So and you don't want him to be. You want him to be who you hope he is, because if that's the case, then he's 3 and out of here, and you're moving on to the next guy. But I think you want to get him in as much as you can. I think in a perfect world, Joe plays well. Tennessee gets up in a bunch of games. Nico gets a bunch of run in those games. He gets a bunch of run in the dud games. And then we'll see what happens in league play. But I think you want to try to push him in there as much as possible because you want him to go in, again, providing that Joe is good Joe. You want him to go into 24 with as much experience as possible. Right. You don't want him rolling in there having only played, kind of mop-up duty. You'd love to, have him in there, going against some decent defenses, at some point. And so, I think in the perfect world, and I think for Nico, for his family, I think they would love if Joe's good Joe. Nico kind of, wades into the pool at the steps and doesn't get thrown into the deep end and say swim.
Right.
What win would be bigger for Josh Heupel and his Tennessee program? Beating Georgia, 2-time national champ. They're going to be undefeated, more than likely, when they come to Neyland. Or winning in Tuscaloosa, breaking the back of Nick Saban, beating Alabama 2 years in a row after not beating them for damn near 2 decades. Which one of those do you think would be bigger for the program?
Well, how does the rest of the schedule look? If you tell me that Tennessee's not going to lose any other game but Tuscaloosa, then I'll tell you beating Georgia because that means they're going to Atlanta.
Yeah.
If you're telling me that Tennessee's going to have another blip on the radar, if I was Tennessee, I would rather lose to Georgia, have one more blip on the radar, and win at Alabama.
Yeah, and maybe get into the playoff there with an 11-1 record.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of my thought is if you knew you were guaranteed to go to Atlanta, I'll tell you Georgia. Mm-hmm. But if Atlanta's off the table, which means you're going to have a hiccup, besides the Alabama game, I think that you would go Alabama.
Isn't it wild though that we're sitting here and we're throwing out these hypotheticals when people being like, what are you smoking if we're saying this 2 years ago about they're going to beat Alabama or Georgia, what I mean?
Well, because Tennessee hadn't done it. They had beaten Georgia, fairly frequently up till 2016. They've not done it since. But, Tennessee hadn't beaten Alabama since, 06, and only, one time since 04. And then same thing with, Florida. You had the 16 game, and until last year it was, that was the one shining moment from all the way back to 04 and Will Hoyt and the field goal. And so, to beat Florida, to beat Alabama, to beat LSU, to beat Clemson, all in 1 year, it's almost like, everybody now feels, vindicated. You still got to go win at Florida for the first time since 03. Florida's down, but they look at Tennessee differently than they look at other teams. They feel like, we've won this game 17 in the last 20 years. Yeah. We're supposed to win this game. And they play differently.
Is there one thing about Heupel and company, they have a great way of identifying young talent, getting them out there on the field. Is there a name that you're thinking about that maybe a lot of folks aren't right now but will be at the end of the season?
I look on, I think Arion Carter is a guy that's going to play a lot of football for Tennessee this fall. Is he going to start? I mean, I think that depends on injuries. I think Tennessee starts the season definitely with Beasley and Peely at linebacker, and I think Arion and Herring are right there pushing those guys. I'm interested to kind of see what happens up front. I think this is a contract year for Tyler Barron. I think he knows that. I think it's a contract year for several of those guys. I mean, in reality, this is kind of an odd year because up front on the offensive side, you lose John Campbell at the end of this year. You lose Cooper Mays at the end of this year, more than likely. I mean, he could come back for a COVID year, but probably not. Same thing with Spraggins. Jackson Lampley, Ollie Lane. You can keep going right down the list. All of a sudden, there's a huge turnover on the offensive line.
Yeah.
On the defensive line, you got Bryson Eason, who could go after this year if he had a decent year. I mean, could technically come back for 2 more, but he could also go. Right. Big O, same thing, could come back, but more than likely not. Elijah Simmons, I mean, is he really going to come back for another year next year? I mean, probably not. And so all of a sudden there's a lot of change on the defensive line. So you really need some of those younger guys, whether it be Tyrese Weathersby, Tyree West, David Hobbs, to step up. And I think it's a lot easier to step up on the offensive line, on the defensive line than it is on the offensive line. The younger offensive lineman, I think there's some big question marks there. I think Addison Nichols is the most likely candidate to be that locked-in guy, but I don't think you can 100% say, oh, yeah, he's definitely going to be a starter next year.
Right.
I mean, I think it would help if he kind of got to get into that guard competition in fall camp. Like right now he's basically been put in the, hey, be Cooper's backup and, focus everything you have on center.
Yeah.
I'd love to see them say, hey, go compete for that left guard spot. It's open. It's Ollie Lane and Andre Carrick and some of those other guys. Go battle for that and see what happens, Because I think last year, he kind of went through the motions because he knew he wasn't going to play. And I think you need him invested. Some kids, if you know they're not going to play, just kind of go through the motions.
Yeah.
And you need a kid that, feels like, okay, hey, I'm competing for this. Let's go see what happens. And I think that you need that across the board. Offensively, I think Ethan Davis and McAllen Castles can be guys that are playmakers for Tennessee. Everybody's going to talk about Jacob Warren, and rightfully so. But I think those two players can kind of combine to have a really nice year and be that kind of Princeton-Fant combo guy.
Yeah.
Not necessarily they're going to take handoffs because I don't think that's the case. He was a true jack of all trades, but I think they can be a nice combination to fill that role left by Princeton Fant. And then a receiver, I think everybody just kind of knows what they're going to be, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I just don't, Cam Seldon's had a really good offseason. Again,
right.
How much can he get on the field, though? Got a lot of older guys ahead of him.
Yeah.
Last thing for you, Austin. Your chance to bury Billy Napier if you want to do it. Does he survive, you think? I mean, if they're awful again, the fans down there are crazy. Georgia's awesome. LSU's on the rise. Tennessee, South Carolina on the rise. Florida State on the rise. I mean, I think those fans, they're saying the right things now. But if he's 5-7, I think they're going to be done with it.
They're saying the right things now because he's done a phenomenal job recruiting this offseason.
Yeah.
And I think some of those kids they've gotten are nice rankings more so than okay, that guy's a dude, right? I think that Tennessee's had a few of those over the years where you're like, optically, this guy's good for the class. Now he's probably 2 or 3 years away, and I think. That could be the case a couple of times with Georgia or with Florida. They start with Utah, and then, of course, they've got Tennessee in September. What are they leaving the month of September? If they are a struggle bus leaving the month of September, I think it's it's Katie barred the door because you're right. I mean, LSU, Florida State. I mean, that's the thing for right now. Like we talk about Kentucky. We started this, talking about Kentucky. Kentucky's had the benefit of a kind of a crappy Louisville. Brom ain't going to have a crappy Louisville. They'll be competitive.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Florida all of a sudden has a pretty competitive Florida State. And that is not good when you're trying to pull yourself up by your bootstraps because you've not been very good.
Before you go, Austin, tell the audience, where can they find all your work?
You can go to volquest.com, the On3 Network, the Tennessee On3 site, and we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary. That's September 1st, which was game day last year, and because Tennessee moved that game to Thursday, and it won't be game day this year, but a lot of cool stuff over there. We've got Vol Club Confidential coming back here in the month of August, which is a great one-on-one that I get to do with a player or coach that we do through Tennessee's collective. We've got all kinds of neat content. We have a Sunday night show on our YouTube channel. Subscribe to that. Subscribe to VolQuest. It's a good time to be a Vol fan right now. Tennessee 11-2, and see if they can build off of it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
And then another great Tennessee. So thanks, Austin. Really appreciate you joining the show. If you missed it, I was on the VolQuest podcast this week. Go back and check that out. But also from VolQuest and from Locked On Vols, had Eric Cain back on the show, first time in person. This was a fun one, too. Let's kick it over to our interview with Eric Cain. All right, we're here with Eric Cain, VolQuest, Locked On Vols. How's it going, brother?
Man, again, I'm refreshed. I'm happy to be here. I'm coming in for the last little section of the week, but no, it's good to be here and see all you guys again.
Yeah, and we've had people, Tennessee fans, of course, excited for today, and many have said, you got to get Eric Cain on, so I'm glad you stopped by, and I'm sure everybody's asking you about the NCAA penalties. They got it right, didn't they? Come on.
Yeah. Even Lane Kiffin said that. Did you hear him in there?
It's really fortunate, too, because a couple years ago, of course, they changed the NCAA committee essentially said, hey, we don't want to punish kids who weren't here who broke the rules, essentially. Yeah. And, 18-1 level violations, that should have been a year or two postseason ban, right?
Right.
But because they had that amendment and because Tennessee was so, active in, cleaning house and, literally paying $2.3 million for the investigation and then saying, hey, NCAA, here you go. Hey, also this too, I think that all helped Tennessee out. But I think last Friday it was – really good. Tennessee got the news that it wanted no bowl ban. I think they were prepared to go and fight, go to court if the bowl ban came down. But, $8 million fine, 28 scholarships. You've already done 18, lack of official visits and all that. Of course, the show causes. But I think Tennessee can finally just move on. And, in terms of recruiting, this should, officially say, okay, if I'm a high school recruit right now and I'm a sophomore and I'm thinking, well, if I were to go to Tennessee, could I play for a college football national championship? The answer is absolutely you can now. And that's going to be huge for Heupel.
Let me ask you, we had Mike Griffith on the other day, and he said they went too hard on Jeremy Pruitt. Do you think they went too hard on him?
No. I say this. I've got no issue with Jeremy Pruitt. We didn't have many interactions, but every time we did, he stand-up guy, when I was with him. But, you're seeing some of the stuff in these reports, and you read those documents, and, the Knox News and Knoxville's on a fantastic job kind of uncovering all that, going through emails and text messages, and you're like, you're breaking the rules, but you're being really bad at it too. So in the depths you go, and a lot of this was, kind of pinning all this on young guys and young assistants and recruiting staffers who, if you speak up, you're fired most likely, and it's just kind of a sad situation in that regard. So, in my opinion. No. Maybe you could have retroactive the show cause because it's been out of coaching for 2.5 years. Yeah. But 6-year show cause, I'd say that's about fair.
And I think you hit on the most important aspect of this whole thing because Tennessee, they're already in the fast lane, so to speak. Yeah. This has the opportunity. It is going to give them even more momentum. They just landed a 5-star. You think that's, that has to be in part because there's no postseason ban, and like you said, they can play for a championship now.
Yeah, potentially. Tennessee's been right there with Mike Matthews for a while now, and I think that's it's credit to Josh Heupel and Kelsey Pope, the wide receivers coach. He's such an unbelievable talent. Can really go up in the air and hang there and come down with the ball and win contested catches and 50-50 balls and really nice guy off the field as well. But we're talking about a top 32 player in the country. Yeah. Number 3 player out of Georgia, number 4 at his position. Tennessee got a good one. And it's weird because you thought that these type of recruiting wins were going to come last year, when they got Nico. But really, those kind of came on the defensive side of the football. But really nice receiver. Guy I work with, Matt Ray. I'm sure you guys are familiar with his work. He said it the entire time, not just yesterday, but the entire time. He said, hey, in my opinion, from an evaluation standpoint, I think he's one of the most talented guys in this class, maybe. Wow. So, huge win for Tennessee, and it keeps the ball rolling. You got the news you wanted on Friday. Get a 5-star this week. We'll see what happens with Edwin Spillman on Friday, and who knows? Maybe this will be a top 10 class.
Well, I think it's funny, Eric, that so many people are saying, well, yeah, but they got to replace Jalen Hyatt, Cedric Tillman. Well, this time last year we were sitting around saying, would Jalen Hyatt ever live up to the potential?
Yeah.
And I'm not asking you if there's another Biletnikoff winner, because that's such a difficult thing to do. Mm-hmm. But who's the breakout receiver on this team? Because they got a couple options here.
They do. Could you call Brew McCoy breakout? I mean, he had a solid year last year. He was second on the team in receptions. But I guess how I'll phrase this, in 2021 it was Tillman. 2022 it was Hyatt. I think this is going to be Brew McCoy's year, right? Mm-hmm. Really solid. I think they forgot about him sometimes last year. When you have Tillman healthy in the lineup, you have a Hyatt, of course. Yeah. But I would say Brew McCoy, just really solid overall. You can see why he was a 5-star coming out of high school. You look at Dante Thornton, who I think is going to be a stud. Yeah. Long, explosive, coming out of the slot as well, which there's versatility. He can go to the outside as well, too. But coming over from Oregon, where he was just starting to figure it out there late in that 2022 season, he was already going to go to the portal. And I just think the sky's the limit for him in this offense. So I think Brew McCoy is going to be the headliner, but I think Dante Thornton's going to have a really solid season for Tennessee.
And do you think Ramel Keaton arguably could be the most underrated player on this team? I know
Maybe.
You and I have talked about it. Probably the biggest catch of last season against Florida was Ramel Keaton.
And it's a guy that, you just forget about and you count out. And he came in and, when Tillman went down with the injury and, Ramel Keaton rolled in, I was like, okay, well, we'll finish out this Akron game, but, what's the plan for next week? Yeah. And there was 80 again. He's making big catch after. Even in that Alabama game, right before the kick, Brew McCoy had the second big catch, but Ramel Keaton went up, caught a first down catch, got pelted, held on the football. Those big boy catches. I think he's arguably the most underrated player on the team, one of the most underrated receivers in the SEC, a guy that, again, I thought was going to leave a couple of times and just stayed with it. So it's a great story. Again, he's a name I don't even bring up in this conversation, but he's earned the right. He's going to be a starting wide receiver in this offense. And so excited to see him go to work. Happy for him, too, as well. I mean, you're talking a guy who opted out in 2020, but, again, came back, stayed the course, and look at him now.
I think one of the biggest question marks we have is that offensive line. A lot of new faces coming in. You're in there. You're seeing it. How's that front five shaping up right now?
It's arguably one of the biggest questions. I mean, Joe Milton's a huge question, of course, the secondary, and then offensive line. You bring back a couple guys who've got tons of playing experience, Javonte Spraggins, Cooper Mays, Tennessee's left tackles last year. I say tackles because two guys split that position, almost even split in terms of snaps, and Gerald Mincy and J.J. Crawford. But you bring in John Campbell, who's started 11 games at left tackle for Miami last year. He's going to play on the left side. You're going to take those two I just mentioned. They're going to go to the right side. One of those guys, probably Gerald Mincy, will win that job. You got to find a left guard, and that's a huge question mark right now. You've got a reserve in Ollie Lane, who's played a lot for Tennessee but has never been a starter. He's probably the front runner to win that job right now. You have a rising sophomore in Addison Nichols, a highly rated 4-star prospect last cycle. He's going to compete with him. You have Andre Keurig, transfer from Texas, coming over as well. So a big question at left guard. Got to find a right tackle. But I think in this offense that you don't need road graders, essentially. Yeah. You can, and I don't mean you can get by with weak offensive linemen, but you can mask a lot of this play because of the tempo and because even in the run game, you're so spread out, you open up a lot of vertical run lanes there. And so it's a question, but I'm going to have faith in Heupel's offense that it's going to be where it needs to be.
How big of a step do you think the defense takes? Because everyone we talk to here about Tennessee, they laud Heupel, and everyone knows Joe Milton. We'll see what we get out of him, but a lot of people look at him as how high he plays, is how high Tennessee will go. But they all of them, Shane, they say, well, the defense is awful or it sucks and it's going to hold them back. And I don't think that's the case. I think they got emerging talent at pass rusher. They're stout against the run. And yes, everybody thinks of South Carolina, but they have talent in the backfield. They just added a trio of elite corners. Mm-hmm. What's your expectations for the defense this year?
I have been beating this drum all offseason. again, my listeners of Locked On Vols are tired of hearing it because I say it all the time. The South Carolina game happened. You can't erase it. It was awful.
Yeah.
But Tennessee's defense took so many steps in the right direction last year. You mentioned great against the run, second in the SEC. Granted, the pass defense is horrible, so it kind of goes hand in hand. Much better on third downs, much better in red zone opportunities, forcing field goals instead of points. Increases takeaway totals. Was on par with the TFL and sack numbers from the year before, which is one of the best in program history in year one for Josh Heupel. So it took steps in the right direction.
Yeah.
Where it's got to continue to take steps is, I mean, you got to get better in the secondary. No ifs, ands, buts about it. And what will help with that is a consistent pass rush. Rushing with 4, not having to blitz a linebacker or blitz somebody from the secondary. That's a big question for Tennessee. But you bring back virtually everybody except Trayvon Flowers. You add Gabe Judy-Lawley from BYU, who was at Vanderbilt. You add, Ricky Gibson at cornerback, Jordan Matthews, Christian Conyers. So there's a whole lot of guys there. I think the biggest difference in the secondary this year is you're going to see, for Tennessee's perspective, those same secondary guys might be out there starting game one, but the second one of them gets beat, send in somebody else because you have faith that you have a bench, whereas the first 2 years you didn't. So that's what I'm looking for. Linebacker, they're going to be super deep. I think up front they're super deep. So I think Tennessee's defense is going to take a step in the right direction. I do. And pick up where they were last year where they took a step in the right direction. It was not nearly as bad as what everybody wants to make it out to be. Everybody just remembers South Carolina, and, deservingly so. That was pretty bad.
Well, I will talk schedule here. I mean, we got a very confident Joe Milton come out here and say he's never lost in Florida, you know. So going to that Gator game, that's one that's just, as a Vol fan, has scarred us for many, many years.
Oh, yeah.
And everybody's out here shitting on the Florida Gators. They're no good. They ain't got to worry about them. But us diehard Vol fans has still got
better
that
watch
little,
out. Better watch out.
What are you expecting in that game? Because again, it was a very physical game last year, it was a Hooker Richardson matchup.
Biggest difference is you don't have number 4 overall pick that it showed why he was the number 4 overall pick against Tennessee's defense. Florida's down this year. I think if you're going to judge Billy Napier this year, it better not be on wins, in my opinion, because he's recruiting well. I think he's a good coach, but it's going to be tough this year, especially with starting Utah and, of course, some other games on that schedule. But to your point, Tennessee hadn't won since 2003 in the Swamp, 2 wins since 2004. And there's been a lot of teams that Tennessee was better than Florida, but Florida always finds a way to win. So, again, that's the tone setter, in my opinion, for this team. I mean, it's week 3. Virginia's not that good, and I don't think Tennessee will be very good week 1. I think Tennessee needs to be better in week 2, and then obviously setting up for week 3 here with Florida. So what an environment early in the season. I think that game is really going to set the tone for the season. But, I'm going to pick Tennessee to win. There should be no reason Tennessee shouldn't win that game.
Right.
But you better, if you're a Tennessee fan.
By how many touchdowns, though?
I think it'll be close for sure because those games always are. And about Joe Milton, he's from Orlando.
Yeah.
And, he's I think he won a state championship. Of course, he won the Orange Bowl last year. I think that's kind of where he was saying with that. But, of course, it was some great bulletin board material. So we'll see. But that Florida game is going to be huge.
Which game do you think is most likely to be a win this season? At Alabama or Georgia at home? And before you even answer that, how wild that you're not sitting there cracking up. Because if I asked you that a year ago, 2 years ago, it's like, get the hell out of here. What are you smoking? But, that's a legitimate question after winning 11 games, Orange Bowl. I realize those are formidable games, but you got to have confidence that Tennessee can, bare minimum, compete with those teams.
It's tough because so much of this answer is going to dictate on quarterback play. Really for all 3 teams when you think about it. I think Alabama is going to revert back to having a game manager to where they're going to play elite defense, run the football well, still win a whole lot of games.
Yeah.
But, you don't have a Tua Tagovailoa. You don't have a Mac Jones, a Bryce Young, right? Can Ty Simpson or Tyler Buckner, I don't think it's going to be Jalen Milroe, can they be good enough to win you the big games? We'll find out. Carson Beck, who I believe is going to win the job, I think from a talent perspective, man, he's pretty solid, right? And, of course, there's still a whole lot of toys there to play with at Georgia. Man, I can't believe I'm saying this. I will probably, with respect, because, again, I'm not saying Alabama sucks now.
He's saying it. He's saying it.
I'll say go on the road.
We're definitely high-fiving after this interview.
I'll say going on the road beating Alabama. Doesn't mean Tennessee can't beat Georgia at home, but Georgia's just solid top to bottom. That defense is going to be good again. It's got one of the best running games in all the SEC. They got a lot of toys in the receiver room. And I think, again, from a talent perspective, I think, Beck's pretty solid. So I'll say on the road in Tuscaloosa, and, again, that's just crazy to even say right now.
I got one. South Carolina clearly was a landmine for us last year. Is there, other than Florida, Alabama,
real quick, though,
Georgia?
answer. Sorry to cut you off. Hey, you answered that question. What would you say? On the road at Alabama or at home against Georgia?
Alabama. Yeah, we've done it. I think that helps with a lot of people that's on there. Georgia is they're kind of getting that. Remember growing up, it's like that Alabama. Remember Butch Jones said it's the red team or something like that.
Yeah.
Trying to get that logo out. I think that's flip flop now. I think Georgia is that logo that's in their heads a little bit because they went down there and say what you want. It was a close game score wise, but it wasn't a close game. And I think a lot of people are back on that roster this year thinking about it. So I'm going to Alabama, but. I just want to ask you, landmine, is there a game out there that people aren't talking about on this schedule, like at South Carolina last year, that if Tennessee doesn't come to play, they may lose?
Yeah, sorry to cut you off completely there. Man, there's a couple.
No, we can literally talk about beating Bama all day long.
There's a couple. That South Carolina game at Neyland Stadium is going to be big this year. You had the off week, and then A&M, coming to Neyland Stadium right there in week 5 or 6. Again, A&M could be world beaters at that point, or they could be just a complete disaster. Is Jimbo Fisher allowing Bobby Petrino to call plays, and is he admitting it to the media? I don't know. He didn't do that the other day. But I think those are two potentially. I mean, that Kentucky game is going to be solid.
Yeah.
It's going to be tough. Upgraded tremendously at quarterback. They've got some great receivers. If they can figure out the offensive line where they lost a lot, I think they could be pretty dangerous. And, of course, that game's at home. So I would probably say I'll say Kentucky, but I think South Carolina at home is going to be big, and, of course, A&M as well.
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad. I'm so disappointed you said Kentucky because I was going to go there and try to catch you on one because I think they're going to be pretty good too, and that's their Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But it was funny. We had some Kentucky guys just a moment ago. I said, "How big's that Florida game?" And they said, "What about that Vanderbilt game?" And I was like, "Yeah, they're still Kentucky guys at heart." You know what?
I got one last one for you. The Missouri game last year. Okay, that one felt a little personal for Heupel. I don't know if it was, and I'm not saying he ran up the score or anything like that.
Heupel running up the score? No.
Yeah. Could you see something similar? You mentioned that South Carolina game.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
definitely.
I think this one is going to be teed up very nicely. I've been on record thinking that Tennessee's going to win, clearly. But will he stop or will he keep going?
I don't know how much of your audience is South Carolina fans, but I'm going to get roasted for this. First, I'll say I think Shane Beamer's doing a hell of a job right now. He really is. But, boy, we've seen this before, haven't we?
Yeah.
When it ends, because all marriages end at some point. Not everybody's Nick Saban. I mean, look at Pat Fitzgerald. He was there for 20-plus years, and it just ended.
Yep.
When it ends, it's going to be bad because of his antics. But I think he's a good coach. He's recruiting really, really well. But the antics that he displayed on that sideline last year in the game against Tennessee, boy, yes. Josh Heupel will beat him by 100 if he can. By 100. Oh, my goodness. I mean, look what he did against UT Martin last year. And that was something just so minor. I mean, yes, if given the chance, Joe Milton will play the entire game. And even if it's not Joe Milton, if it's Nico or Gasson Moore, he'll be throwing 50-yard bombs at the end zone at the end of the game for sure. So we'll see if Tennessee can be in that position.
All right, really appreciate you, Eric. Before you go, tell the audience where can they find you?
Yeah, @_Cainer on Twitter. It's where I post all my work. If there's any Tennessee fans out there that want to subscribe and check us out over at VolQuest.com, tons and tons of coverage over there as well.
All right, Eric, I appreciate you joining the show. I know I'll be back on their show soon, and I'm sure we're going to have Eric on the show as the season gets here. But we got to move it on to South Carolina. A fun little story here. We got Spencer Rattler, exclusive one-on-one, and yes, I asked him about the quarterback rankings. I got him 9th in the rankings, but a little behind the scenes. I wish Cousin Shane was here to share the story, but at media days, a lot of people treat it like it's a little bit of a party and they have a good time, which more power to them. But we are nonstop work there. Well, almost nonstop, because there was one night we got hooked up, free drinks at a place, and Cousin Shane had a few too many. He did not make his way down to media days on time. Missed most of this interview. I was kind of hoping that he would bring up the quarterback rankings. We have a little, that was the game plan anyway if we got Spencer Rattler, but Shane missed it. He does come in for the final question. So here's our exclusive one-on-one with South Carolina's QB1, Spencer Rattler. Spencer Rattler, South Carolina starting quarterback. And I don't know if you have any idea who I am, but I'm the guy. You have to have seen it. I put up my SEC quarterback rankings. I got you 9th. So
9th.
I may be your biggest. I don't want to say call haters because I don't hate anybody,
Yeah.
right? But I got to put stuff out there, get some buzz.
Yeah.
So people like me that are downgrading you, here's your opportunity. You can say whatever you want. I will not take offense to anything you have to say about me.
Hey, man, I respect your opinion. Obviously, we're working hard this offseason. It's not just about me, about our group. If we all play well, everybody will have individual success. Obviously, want to come out, have a great year. Not prove everybody wrong, but prove ourselves right. And I think we're in the right direction right now.
Yeah, and I'm a Tennessee guy, so everybody's already said, oh, well, that's why he did it. And maybe that is part of it. I mean, you had the game of your life against Tennessee. Have you ever been in the zone quite like you were against the Vols last year?
Yeah, earlier in my career, at Oklahoma, we've had a few games definitely like that. I don't think I've ever thrown 6 touchdowns, but I've had 5 before, once or twice. But, definitely everybody was in the zone that Tennessee game, and what a great environment, what a great night at Willie B.
Yeah, have you heard the joke yet? I know you guys brought your punter down here, great punter, but Tennessee fans have got on Shane Beamer. Well, of course, the Gamecocks, they don't have enough good players. They got to bring a punter, and all the Gamecocks have said, well, hell, Tennessee fans don't know South Carolina's got a punter. So you guys had to let them know you guys got a punter, and he's a hell of a punter too.
Hell of a punter. I mean, Kai Kroger, legit punter. Obviously threw a few touchdowns this year. Perfect completion percentage. So, I mean, he's always, backup quarterback option. But, yeah, man, great punter. Does a lot of great things for our team and, helped us out a lot, specifically in that Clemson game, later in the game.
Yeah, I'm glad you went there because I was going to ask you. We've been asking a lot of people what the Clemson game, the Tennessee game, which one meant more to you?
I would say, obviously the Clemson game, just because it's such a big rivalry. I didn't realize how big of a rivalry it was until I got here. And, I mean, there's people that still come up to us, to this day saying, man, you made my year so great beating Clemson. So, obviously that's a great feeling.
Yeah. What's it like playing for Shane Beamer? He seems like a cool guy.
Amazing coach, great person, great father. Great leader, everything. I've known Coach Beamer for some years now. Obviously, he was at Oklahoma with me for a year or two. And, when the portal hit, I knew South Carolina was a good option because of him. And, credit to him. He's a great coach, and he's got our team in the right direction.
What do you think so far of working with Coach Dow Loggins and his offensive system? I would imagine, there's not going to be many better that are going to be able to prepare you for the NFL given all his experience at that level.
Yes, no, Dow's a great coach, great person. Me and him have a great partnership, and he loves input from me and other quarterbacks and our group as a whole offensively. And he's got us doing everything correct, really putting this offense down to the T, and we're going to perfect it here in camp. But yeah, he's coached quarterbacks for several years in the NFL, and definitely knows about the position and what it takes.
How much does having Juice Wells make your life a little bit easier on Saturday?
Juice is a great player, great competitor. Not just him, though. We got Xavier Legette. He's going to be a breakout player this year. Amarian Brown, our tight ends, Trey Nixon, Josh Simon. So many weapons on the field. Nick Harbor, new freshman that just came in. A lot of weapons.
Is there anyone quite as physically gifted as Nicholas Harbor?
He is pretty gifted. I would say, height and speed-wise, you can't get much better than that. But, guys like Xavier Legette is very gifted as well. He's about 225, 230, running 4.4, jumping 40. I mean, we got a lot of dogs.
Yeah. Who's going to be a breakout offensive player for the Gamecocks this fall?
That's a great question. I don't think I could pick one. I'd be wrong of me to pick one. We got a handful of guys that can be breakout players, to be honest.
Yeah. How much are you looking forward to the opener in North Carolina? People always make it quarterback versus quarterback. You're not on the field at the same time as him. But a lot of eyes are going to be on that, and whoever wins that game, automatically they're going to be talking better draft prospect, better Heisman candidate. How much personally are you looking forward to that opener?
Yeah, man, it's going to be a great competition, great battle. Looking forward to that game. Obviously, never played them before. Knowing it's South Carolina versus North Carolina, so obviously a big rivalry, and we're going to prepare like it's we have a saying, nameless and faceless opponents. So no matter who that name is on the schedule, we're going to prepare the same.
Yeah. Well, here's my Nicholas Harper. This is my co-host right here.
I figured since he crushed my college football playoff dreams, they could make him wait a second.
I already asked him about the quarterback rankings, whooping Tennessee, whooping Clemson. You got a question real quick for Spencer before he's got to take off?
Yeah, one question. Because the way you ended the season last year, obviously it broke my heart. But which game, I guess, do you keep reliving in your mind? Was it the Tennessee one or was it that Clemson?
Both games were great games. I say from November on, we had a great end to the season. That's when we really started clicking. I really don't relive it too much in my mind. Try to focus on the present. But yeah, both games, how we ended the season was great.
We live it every day, Spencer. So thank you very much, man.
Yep.
I appreciate your time, bro.
Yep, appreciate
We don't call them dreams. We call them nightmares.
Yep.
All right, thank you for that. Well, I mean, Spencer handled himself like a true professional there. And I think, South Carolina fans are mad I even asked that question, but I feel like I kind of had to bring it up. When I got the guy face-to-face like that, you got to bring up, because, hell, I don't know if anybody's seen it, but they've been plastering that all over Columbia, the rankings and whatnot. So I felt like I had to ask him, get his reaction from that. But moving on to Shane Beamer, good stuff here from the Gamecock leader. And one of the things, talked about this a lot, but I think it's paramount for South Carolina as they turn that program around, climb the SEC ladder. They were voted third in the East, remember, so that's incredible expectations. That puts you as a top 20 program in the country. We'll see if South Carolina can get there, but the key, I think, for Beamer and company, the thing that has impressed me the most, only 2 years there, he's flipped games like Texas A&M. That was a terrible streak. They never beaten the Aggies. Kentucky had owned South Carolina. I realize Will Levis is out. Calm down, Wildcats. I'm getting to the point here. They snapped the Tennessee streak in historic fashion, beat the hell. I think that was the worst loss Josh Heupel ever had as a head coach, I believe. And then beat Clemson, beat that ass in Death Valley, so they'll get Clemson at home this year. But I think it's paramount. You don't got to win all these games again because A&M's on the road. Tennessee's on the road. It's going to be difficult. But if you can win half of these games, if you can win 3 of them, and I'm specifically talking A&M, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Clemson, you almost have to keep some of the momentum. You can't, once you beat all these teams, then turn around and lose to them all and have all this momentum. So I think these are critical games for South Carolina this fall to keep that momentum. Again, they don't have to win them all because Neyland Stadium's going to be geared up for them. Clemson's going to be geared up for them. At A&M, that's one of the toughest places in the country to play. We'll see how improved Texas A&M is, if at all. I think they will be, but we'll see. Kentucky, again, I said it, what was it, yesterday's show, I think they could be the most improved offense in the country. These are not going to be easy games, but you have to keep momentum on your side in some of these games. Here's Shane Beamer on A&M and Kentucky and what those wins meant for his program.
Tyler Shaw with KBTX in College Station. Yeah. What did it mean? I mean, last year for the program to beat Texas A&M for the first time ever, and how much you looking forward to that game again?
Yeah, it meant a lot. Obviously, had never happened at South Carolina, and you hear different horror stories about some of the games over the years. I was a part of one in 2021 when we came out to College Station, so it was huge because of the respect that we have for Coach Fisher and that entire program. And that's one of the great programs in all of college football, great tradition. So for us to finally get that done, that was an electric night in Columbia, South Carolina. I was in Houston, Texas, speaking on Sunday to the Texas high school coaches and got asked that question by a lot of the people there in Texas about the atmosphere in Columbia that night, and it was elite, without a doubt. And the other thing I'm proud of, that was a game. We had beaten Kentucky the game before up in Lexington where they were nationally ranked. We had a week off, so it was 2 weeks of everybody patting our players on the back, telling them how great they are. But then to follow that up with a huge win over a great program in Texas A&M was really, really good for us.
And you just knew Shane Beamer, he's not going not get asked about Beamer ball here from our guy Mike Uva down there. We'll get to that interview in just a second, but wanted to ask about special teams, and I thought there was some interesting comments here from Shane Beamer, who, some people think it's gimmicky and all that, but I think he hits the nail on the head here.
Shane, before I ask you a special teams question, since we're in Nashville, I don't know if you're aware that you were part of the first Music City bowl game, and you won that game in '98. Your dad was obviously the coach, and of course, you guys had a block kick. I think it was Corey Moore.
Yep, 38-7 over the Crimson Tide that night. Yep, one of the coldest games I've ever been a part of.
So, staying with special teams, you guys, and obviously, the Beamer ball brand, we've talked about it multiple times, but to finish number one in efficiency last year from a special team standpoint, the contract extension or the boost with Pete Lumbo, now that target is on your back and it's even bigger now, how do you guys continue to have that success, number one? But number two, how do you emphasize that to the players? Because obviously more guys want to be on special teams now.
Yep. Going back, also played at Vanderbilt Stadium because the Titan Stadium hadn't been built yet. So also a little known fact about that '98 Music City Bowl as well. Unbelievable year on special teams, and to me, Mike, it's kind of what we've talked about with every other area of our program, like how can we be better? We won games on special teams last season. The way that we controlled field position in the Clemson game, returning a kickoff against Texas A&M, some of the fake punts, fake field goals that we ran. So let's continue to be great, but how can we be even better? And we have, and not just special teams. I mean, I've challenged everybody, myself, nutrition, weight room, training room, you name it. Like, how are we going to be better this year? And Pete, he's already come to me with his new ideas for fake punts and fake field goals and things like that. He's been like a mad scientist, and you realize that you do have somewhat of a target on your back now. So as a competitor, you love that. We've got to continue to be better, and confident that we will be, because we bring the core of our special teams units back: snapper, punter, kicker, kickoff returner. So that's a great benefit without a doubt also. And then certainly when you have success on special teams, it creates momentum where other guys want to be a part of it. And we got guys on our team that come and want to be on special teams, and certainly guys know that's the quickest way to get on the field. We're only allowed to travel, 70 guys to away games. Well, we got 120 guys on our team, so the guys that we take to games are going to be ones that help us on offense, defense, and special teams as well. So it's a great motivating factor, but, nobody comes to South Carolina because they want to be the starting gunner on the punt team or the left tackle on the field goal team. But when you have success like we had, it makes guys want to get out there and be a part of that.
So he's teasing new special teams plays, trick plays, and all that. Pete Limbo, arguably the best overall coordinator in the country, but certainly the best special teams coordinator in the country. But, you kind of don't think about it sometimes, but those are momentum plays. Like he said, they're almost like turnovers, to where you're not necessarily expecting anything. Could be a touchback or, just a punt changing hands, but not at South Carolina. There's fakes all the time. There's touchdowns on kickoff, touchdowns on punt team. Those are like turnovers for the momentum they cause in a football game. So it's kind of cool to hear Shane Beamer talk about that. But it's also cool to talk to our buddy Ben Portnoy from the state. He's been on the show a number of times. Let's go on a deep dive here on South Carolina with Ben. All right, Ben Portnoy from the state, back in action at SEC Media Days. How you been, brother?
I'm good. Getting my feet under me here. It's Monday, right? It's a long week, so you got to pace yourself a little bit, but it's good. It's good. Good to be back and good to see people.
So let me ask you this. This is something I've kind of been asking a lot of people for the teams they cover specifically. What's something you want to learn about South Carolina from this event?
I think something that I'm really interested to watch, and it's maybe not even necessarily about South Carolina, but more like third-party viewing, is I'm curious to see the reception that Spencer Rattler gets, frankly. I think that, he's a guy that gets talked about so much in sort of the construct of college football, and maybe took a step back from that, being at South Carolina last year versus sort of the spotlight and sort of the scrutiny that he got at Oklahoma 2 years ago now. Him being in the spotlight, him being at SEC Media Days, I kind of think that there's going to be a little bit of a circus around it when he does get here, and I think that that's going to be – it's just going to be interesting to see sort of the reception, sort of what sort of the questions that he gets asked, how he handles it. But, obviously we as local reporters have dealt with Spencer a lot in the last year, and he's been really great. But it'll be really interesting to see him sort of back in the center of college football again a little bit when he gets here on Thursday.
Were you kind of surprised that he decided to come back?
Definitely. I think it was definitely a real decision. I think that, to me and sort of the perception had always been that it was going to be a one-year experiment, and it was either going to work or it wasn't, and everyone was going to kind of go their opposite ways at the end, because that's generally how those things go, especially with a a transfer in that sort of setting. But, I think that when you looked at it, like, Spencer's a guy that he's going to get drafted on his arm talent alone, whether he plays well or not. I mean, that's just the kind of arm talent that he has. But those last two games made you think, the last two games of the regular season, I should say, made you think, okay, if he puts this together for a full season, what does that look like? What's he capable of down the stretch? Those things. And now, I don't think anyone here is necessarily saying that Spencer's going to be, what he was against Tennessee or what he was against Clemson every single game next year. But I think the thought is that, okay, if he can go piece that together more consistently or be a little bit more prolific, be a little more comfortable more of the year than not, I think that makes a big difference. You're talking about a guy who's a, second-round pick maybe, or a first-round pick who plays really, really well versus a, fourth, fifth, mid-round guy.
Right.
And I think that's the biggest thing that stood out to me, at least in terms of why he would want to come back. Now, that said, again, I think I was still a little surprised that he came back, but it makes for some interesting talking points this time of year, that's for sure.
Well, the old adage, quarterbacks get too much blame and too much credit. But this year, I think it's kind of fair, given that, lack of depth at running back, questions on the O-line. They do got Juice Wells, who may be the best receiver in the entire SEC, Trey Knox, but it feels, and this is so simplistic, but it feels like South Carolina's going to go as far as Spencer can take them.
Yeah, I think so, because I think that, I think we even talked about this at Media Days last year, is like, at some point Spencer's just going to go win you a football game. And last year it happened to be the Tennessee game, and you could argue even the Clemson game a little bit too. And that may happen again this year, but the way that this team is structured as is, I think they've got talent. It's the skill positions, especially at wide receiver and tight end, but the running back situation's a little bit questionable. Like, you're at the point where you're either going to see it or you're not with Spencer, and that's not necessarily a knock. It's just a matter of that's kind of where we're at in his career and his progression, right? Like, it's either going to work for most of the season or it's not. And I think that was the thing that was, kind of frustrating for a lot of people, I think, to watch last year, was that you saw it in spurts. And, even the games where he wasn't playing well, you saw it in moments. You saw it in a half or a quarter. I mean, the Kentucky game, he was kind of all over the place in the first half. And it wasn't necessarily a thought of, okay, are you going to make a change at quarterback? But it was kind of just like, okay, what are we watching here kind of thing?
Yeah.
And then turns around and goes 8 of 12 for 135 yards and 2 or 3 touchdowns in the second half. And South Carolina goes and beats Kentucky at Kentucky for the first time in almost a decade. And, so you saw it in spurts, and then obviously you saw it over the course of a full game against Tennessee, against Clemson, and frankly even against Notre Dame in the bowl game for most of it. But I think that if you look at South Carolina as they're constructed, this is Spencer Rattler's team. If this team is going to go jump up to whatever, let's say it's 8, 9 wins, whatever that, sort of high-end mark is, it's going to be because of what Spencer does. It's because he goes and wins you maybe 2 games instead of 1 like he did last year.
Yeah.
And I think, it's fair to say that, what this team can be, at least on its highest end, I think falls on Spencer.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you real quick, because I've always been a Marshawn Lloyd fan. And the fact that he left, I think that was the biggest surprise for me. Can you take us a little behind the locker room there? What was potentially going on in his mind and why he had to leave that campus?
Yeah, I think for Marshawn it was a question of, I think that if you ask Shane Beamer, if you ask people in the program, they'll tell you, they felt good about Marshawn coming back and, went home and talked through some things with his family and decided that he just needed a fresh start. And sometimes a kid needs that, after however many years and an injury, a pretty serious injury.
Yeah.
His first year here at South Carolina, had dealt with some injury stuff down the stretch in the last season as well. So I think there's something to be said about playing and just getting a fresh start, and that happens. And, whether that's the case always, certainly there's other things going on in college football that can be reasons for guys to leave, but I'll leave it there. But I'll try a little lightly. But
sticking on that theme, the portal helped South Carolina immensely last season.
Mm-hmm.
This season, do you think? I mean, they still added guys. It's not like they didn't add anybody, but do you think it'll be a overall plus or overall minus the portal?
That's the thing is, I think the last 2 years, South Carolina's definitely been a portal winner.
Right.
I think it's been pretty easy to say they've won in the portal. And, Shane Beamer's first year, it was kind of maybe a few more lower key guys as far as star power, but they got guys that really filled roles and really played well. Carlin Splatell is a guy they got from a Division II school and ended up being a starting nickel for most of the year and is now still, bouncing around the NFL a little bit. So guys like that. year 2, you get Spencer Rattler, you get Austin Stogner from Oklahoma, a couple other guys. Like that was a high level like talent. This group I think is going to be some of that. Like Trey Knox is a guy that I think can, if you look up at the end of the year and Trey Knox is your second team all SEC tight end, I can buy into that. What you do have, though, this year is the first time that you've had some guys leave that were really big pieces, I think. Jordan Birch is a guy that left. We just mentioned it. Marshawn Lloyd's a guy that left. Jaheim Bell left. Gilbert Edmond, your other starting defensive end, left. So, some of those guys, maybe it's a matter of getting a fresh start, and that's fine, and coaches are maybe ready for, it's an amicable thing. It's just like, hey, I've been here for 3 years. I'm ready for something different. That's fine. Like, that happens, and I think that sometimes we lose that in the grand scheme of the transfer portal. Look, are there guys leaving just because they can leave? Yeah, sure, that exists. But I think you're losing a lot of – this was the first year where you felt like they lost some guys that were maybe difference makers. Now, they've done well in the portal. They've developed guys. I think you've seen South Carolina, this coaching staff has done a pretty good job of maximizing talent for the most part. So we'll see. I think they're kind of at a net zero. I don't want to say it's a loss because I do think there's some guys they brought in that are going to be really good pieces. I mean, I mentioned Trey Knox. Nick Gargiulo, who they brought in on the offensive line from Yale, I think is a guy that I've circled that I think may surprise some people and maybe a really important piece on the line this year. Mario Anderson at running back from Newberry, from right up the road, is a D2 transfer, but he was a finalist for the Harlan Hill Trophy last year, the Division II Heisman to characterize it, I guess. So at running back, so maybe he ends up seeing a lot of time and ends up being a really big piece. But so you lost some high end guys, and I think they're probably lean more toward a loser than a winner right now, just because of sort of. You don't necessarily have the sexy names at the top of it that you brought in, but I do think there's some guys that are going to fill out some big roles and be productive. I think it's definitely it's a little bit of a different spot than they were in maybe a year ago or 2 years ago for sure.
Are we gonna get some sort of hype reel before Beamer shows up?
I keep thinking about that. I'm like, man, the last 2 years. 2 years ago, it was going and recreating the Spurrier with what was it, Taco Bell, I guess, or Arby's, whatever it was.
Their marketing team's great. I mean, they're fantastic.
I don't know what they've got cooked up, but I've stopped trying to predict it because I've tried and I can't get out ahead of that one. I'm just sort of like.
I think my favorite one's the speed limit one. When
speed limit one's good. Hey, as an Office fan, I was super in on that. That was impressive. I think underrated the Full House intro video.
Yeah.
That gets lost in the shuffle a little bit because it was in like a dead period, but I was in on that one. I thought that was a good one. So they've done some good stuff.
Pressure is probably not the right word because when we hear pressure, you think job security and things like that. But how important is that Clemson game for Beamer to, everyone's on board with Shane Beamer right now, but you lose to Clemson, again, they're not going to be calling for his job, but they're going to be, I think those fans are going to be pissed.
It's funny because, as you guys know as well as anyone, right? Like, college football is a what have you done for me lately thing.
Right.
Like, listen, Dan Mullen went and won the SEC East and then was fired, less than 2 years later? I mean, that's just the reality of college football, and it's crazy, and that's a whole other discussion we can talk about for 6 hours. But I think that when you look at that Clemson game and what it means to people in the state, it's obviously the game that everyone circles, and there's definitely sort of the feeling of, you could go 1-11, but make sure you beat Clemson, and certainly South Carolina fans more than that, and Clemson fans want more than that, obviously. But I do think that it's definitely a turning point. I think that last year was a big moment like that. It's not nothing that was the first time in 7 years that South Carolina's beaten Clemson, and I think it's the first time that I think I'm curious what Clemson becomes, right? You bring in Garrett Riley. You've got a quarterback back that you feel really good about. You're going to have some skill position players. But, I think Dabo's in a really strange place of they're not recruiting. I mean, they're recruiting really well right now, but I think that it's definitely there's an opening there, and South Carolina really opened that door with that win last year in Death Valley, and especially coming off the Tennessee win, the way that finishes out a season, that's a big deal. And I think that if you're South Carolina, if you're Shane Beamer, if you go in and beat Clemson 2 years in a row, that becomes a real conversation, right? It's not a one-off, okay, South Carolina got us this year, whatever. That becomes a real conversation of, okay, I mean, are these teams on equal playing field? And is that a product of South Carolina ascending? Is it a product of Clemson taking a step back? Tough to say, right? But I do think that becomes a real conversation, and I think that certainly it doesn't hurt job security in this business to beat your rival every year.
Well, the old stereotype, real quick, of a coach that refuses to adapt. I think old Dabo, NIL, transfer portal. So I think he's losing his grip.
Well, I like the momentum too. The way in, even though the bowl game didn't go as expected or as we want. We can still pinpoint why it didn't go.
Yeah.
I just think the way they closed with Tennessee, with Clemson, how important does this North Carolina game be? With all this momentum behind you, and you could come away with egg on face, so.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, South Carolina's schedule is nuts. And, I mean, if you guys look at it, like, their first 5 weeks are you've got UNC, you've got at Georgia, you're at Tennessee, you're home against a Mississippi State team that I think I'm probably higher on Mississippi State than most people. But, like, if you tell me that Mississippi State wins 8 or 9 games this year, I'm buying it. Like, I think they're going to be pretty good. I don't think people realize that.
That's a touchy subject, apparently, Mississippi State. Yeah.
Let me tell you, after 2 years in Starkville, I'm plenty familiar. But I do think that, like, the first 4 games of that schedule, there's a world where South Carolina starts the season 1-4, and things soften up on the back end. And if you get, but like that North Carolina game, that Mississippi State game, I mean, I'd argue even the Tennessee game. Like, if South Carolina gets through that first 5 game stretch at 2-3 or 3-2, they should feel really good about where they're at. And I think that's, South Carolina fans will tell you, or Shane Beamer will tell you, hey, we want to win all 5 games. And okay, great, that's fine. But the reality is they're probably not going to go beat Georgia in Athens. Sorry, it's just not going to happen. And you're probably going to lose one of those games against Mississippi State, Tennessee, or North Carolina. And like you mentioned, North Carolina being the first game of the season. Weird things happen in first games of the season. If you told me that game ends up like 54-52, I kind of buy it. I mean, Spencer Rattler's probably going to throw the ball 67 times or something. Drake May probably is going to do the same thing. So it's going to be a fun game. Like, that game's got really sort of like weird, sicko college football vibe to it. So I think it's going to be crazy. But I think, if South Carolina goes and wins that game, they should feel really good about themselves, because I think that, they should be favored at home against Mississippi State. They play Furman in there. I mean, you're sitting at 3-2 coming out of that stretch. You should feel pretty dang good about where you're going the rest of the way.
Speaking of your time in Mississippi, did you ever hear someone say it's too small to be its own country, but it's too big to be an insane asylum? That's what they say about Mississippi. Can you verify that?
I can't verify that. Listen, I will say I love my time in Mississippi, and I will go to war for the Egg Bowl. I love the Egg Bowl.
That's our favorite game.
I grew up in the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry. Both my parents are Michigan grads. Like, I grew up in Big Ten football, but I make my family every year now on Thanksgiving watch the Egg Bowl, because it is my favorite thing. Weird stuff always happens. It is the best. I loved it. So it's it's a crazy rivalry. It makes college football fun for sure.
Are you sensing how great of a rivalry is developing between South Carolina and Tennessee? I think because we're Tennessee guys, like South Carolina guys, they just bombard us every day with that score. I'm just wondering if you're sensing that as well.
I think it's fun. I think it makes it fun, and I think that the fact that Tennessee's been, in a place where I think Tennessee's back to being, first of all, like, majorly relevant in college football. Not that they're not talked about, but I think to a point where the on-field stuff backs it up.
Yeah.
I think South Carolina has sort of rebuilt a little bit from sort of the tail end of Muschamp, and I think that makes it that both these programs are. I think it's easy. I think you have to say that Tennessee is ahead of where South Carolina is, just based off the fact that you go and win 10 games, you beat Clemson in a bowl game, et cetera. Like, Tennessee's probably a half step ahead of where South Carolina is, even though South Carolina did win that football game. But I do think it makes it fun, because I think the teams are on similar trajectories. South Carolina's maybe, I guess what's the best way to say it, like half a season behind, maybe, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that makes it fun, and I think it makes it a fun rivalry and all of that. And I think it's, more of a true rivalry than if the SEC wants to make, South Carolina and A&M a permanent rivalry. Fine, but South Carolina and Tennessee makes a little more sense to me.
It's kind of crazy, because South Carolina is turning into Tennessee Twitter. I've noticed. Like, they hate everybody. You say something about Missouri, there's South Carolina. You say something about Kentucky. So on that note,
my mentions would back you up on that too, probably. But
like, which game would be more important for them? Kentucky, Missouri? I don't want to put Tennessee in there because it's its own little thing. But out of those two teams, which ones do you think is more important for South Carolina to win?
I think it's got to be Missouri, because the thing that no one talks about is Eli Drinkwitz is 4-0 against South Carolina, dating back to when he was at App State. I mean, he's won 3 straight games against South Carolina and Missouri. He won the last game he played against South Carolina at App State in 18, I guess. I mean, that is a game that every year South Carolina circles, and folks there say, hey, this should be a win. And I would agree that is a game that I think South Carolina should win more years than not. And they just haven't won it. And I think that it's one of those games that it alleviates so much pressure in some of those other games and makes those windows just a little bit wider for you when you're playing the game of, okay, you're going to win this game, you're going to win that game, whatever. Right. Like, if you're South Carolina, that is a game that you need to dominate that sort of side of things, and they just haven't. And that's, for one reason or another, and certainly there's been some wonky games in there, and, it's hard to really fault South Carolina, say 2 years ago, right, when they're in there with a third-string quarterback and doing what they're doing, and frankly, the fact that team won 7 games is still crazy to me. But, props to Shane Beamer and that staff, because that was wild. I mean, that was a heck of a job. But, so there's stuff like that. But the way that they just, you're 5-2 going into a Missouri game last year, and folks are upset that, they're not ranked or right on the tail end of being ranked, and then you come and kind of, trip over yourself against a Missouri team that had looked kind of whatever for most of the year and, ends up winning, 5 games? That's the thing that I think has been a problem for South Carolina. I think that's why I circled the Missouri game. I think you got it done against Kentucky last year, so maybe it's recency bias a little bit. But and I think Kentucky also, too, is the other part of that, I would say, is that Kentucky's better than where Kentucky was a decade ago. Right. I mean, I think it's impossible to ignore how good of a job that Mark Stoops has done. And even with a step back last year, I mean, Kentucky winning 7 games being a disappointment, let's be real. Talking about that 10 years ago, people would say you're crazy. Yeah. I mean, Kentucky is in a point where they should be at a bowl game most years, or more years than not. And there's years where they're winning 8 games with Lynn Bowden running around at quarterback. They're winning 10 games twice in the last, 6 years, 5 years? I mean, Kentucky is in a different state of a program than where Missouri is right now. And I think that's why, to me, the Missouri game is always, and it has been such a disappointment to me in the last 2 years, at least under Shane Beamer.
Yeah. What do you think it says about Shane Beamer that guys like to carry on Joyner, switching positions? He had that big bowl game you referenced. Luke Doty's another one, touted quarterback. He got some reps at receiver. Now he's back. I mean, these guys usually don't stay in college football. Is that more, do you think, Shane Beamer's program, or do you think those are just unique individuals that maybe they don't want to leave?
I don't know if they're working on their doctorates at this point or what, but no, I mean, I think that both guys are pretty selfless guys, for one, at least the 2 guys you use as examples. I think that, I think it's both. I think it's those guys are guys that want to play for South Carolina, want to be a part of the program, all of that. But I do think it's a product of Shane Beamer. I mean, when you look at, certainly I mentioned some of those guys that left in the transfer portal, but South Carolina really hasn't been hit too hard as far as attrition goes outside of, I mean, this was the first year, if you look back at the 2 years before with Shane Beamer and sort of the first 2 years under his watch and guys that had transferred out, I mean, there's probably, I don't have the number in front of me off the top of my head, but I think it's 4, maybe 5 guys in those 2 classes transferred to other Power 5 schools, and that's out of 35, 40 guys that transferred out. I say that to mean that they're not losing a lot of guys that are necessarily transferring up or going somewhere else because they feel like they can have a better opportunity. It's a lot of guys transferring down a level, and that's not a bad thing. It's just a product of what it is, and I think that speaks to Shane Beamer's staff has been able to retain talent, the high-level talent that they have for the most part, and I think that it speaks to kind of how people feel about the program, what they feel like is going on inside the program and sort of the vibe of it and everything else that goes into it. And, certainly winning helps as well. So it's you mix all those things together, you get a lot of that.
Well, there's a lot of special environments in the SEC. And, I mean, a lot of schools claim, we're top 5, top 10. But when it hits right, Willie B, at night, undoubtedly, in my mind, top 10 scene in college football. What makes it so special on a Saturday night like that Tennessee game?
Yeah, it's really crazy. I mean, I've described it this way a couple of times. It's just when those towels get going and everything. I mean, it looks like an avalanche. I mean, It really does. It envelops the whole stadium, and the energy's there. And obviously the new light show that they've put in is really cool and fun. It's a really cool environment, and I think it's a little bit underrated as far as nationally. I think people talk about Williams-Brice, but I think because of what South Carolina's been as a program largely in its history, it's maybe a little bit underhyped. But it's really cool. I think that you've got a really passionate fan base that I think that certainly there's folks that'll tell you that South Carolina should go win a national championship every year, but I do think that South Carolina fans are generally somewhat realistic. I think it's as realistic as SEC fans can be, right? As realistic as SEC fans can be, right? But I do think that folks are they're informed. I think they generally have a pretty good feel of where the program's at, and I think that more often than not, people you talk to, they have a general feel that South Carolina should be sort of in that middle echelon of the SEC, and that should be that's a good place to be for right now. And I think that you combine that with sort of an informed fan base, a passionate fan base, and all the environment and everything else. I mean, when things are clicking, it's as good a place to watch a football game as anywhere in the country. It's really, really fun.
What do you think it's going to take for South Carolina to truly compete for championships? What needs to happen?
Top 5 recruiting class.
Just recruiting?
I mean, no, and I think I say that sort of tongue in cheek. I think that South Carolina's done a really good job recruiting on the recruiting trail. I mean, they've clearly taken a step up in terms of the guys they're getting. I think that, this 2024 class, I think, is going to be a really interesting case study because it's the first class that really the Shane Beamer's staff has had, so not a full cycle, but almost three full years to evaluate and get on and recruit and be on. And I think that they're on pace for a top sort of 15 class.
Yeah.
At South Carolina, that goes a long way because South Carolina largely is going to be a program where you're going to bring in guys, you're going to get a few high-end guys, but you're going to develop a lot of that talent. If you're bringing up the bottom of that class to a higher level, that carries a lot of weight at a place like South Carolina where you're going to be able to develop that talent. And if you have higher-end talent, it's obviously you're going to develop higher-end products. And I think that, for South Carolina to be in that conversation, I mean, I think quarterback's been a question. Spencer, I think, gives you a chance for sure just because of what he is. I mean, I'm not saying South Carolina's going to win 12 games by any stretch of the imagination right now, but I do think that quarterback's a start. I think that, coaching's a start. I think Shane Beamer's got people behind him, which helps. I think, obviously, the environment's really good. But I do think, the recruiting's on pace. They've done a really good job in the transfer portal for the most part. I think that South Carolina's it's not to the point of like Lane Kiffin and transfer king and all that, but I do think that South Carolina's done a really good job in the transfer portal, and I think they've been really good and really judicious about taking guys, not in the sense of they're just going to take guys to take guys. They've done a really good job of taking guys to fill holes and filling the right holes, and that's not something that every program does. There's programs that just take guys because they need, it helps a headline or whatever it might be. Not literally, but it can happen. I think South Carolina has hit on a lot more guys than they've missed on in the transfer portal, and that goes a long way, especially when you're trying to get older quickly. So that's a roundabout saying I think there's a lot of things they need to do to win a national championship, but I do think that they're sort of pecking in the right direction, no pun intended. But I do think they're. No, I swear that was not intended.
I'm going to need some more of this.
It's just good podcasting, right? But no, I do think they are doing the right things. I think they're taking a step in the right direction, and for South Carolina, it's go win 10 games.
Yeah.
It's put yourself in that conversation in mid-November of being in the conversation for an SEC title game or something along those lines. And I think that's the next step. Is that going to happen this year? I don't know. I think if you're South Carolina, you finish 7-5, 8-4 bowl game going forward. Like, that's a pretty good place to be because that's sustained success. 3 years, that's enough to say, okay, that is some sustained success. A little tongue twister there, but so I think that they're moving in the right direction, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
All right, Ben Portnoy from the State, really appreciate your time. Before you go, can you tell the audience where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, definitely on thestate.com or on Twitter at bportnoy15 or on Threads, I guess now. Is that a thing, right? I think it's the same I think I have the same handle on there, so you can go search it up. So now I got an extra social media thing I got to plug, I guess.
Exactly.
But yeah, go ahead and go there and read all my stuff on thestate.com.
All right, thank you so much, man. That was great.
Appreciate you guys.
All right, so just want to say thanks, Ben, for joining the show. And next, we'll kick it over to Mike Uva from Gamecock Central. This was a fun interview, but I think Mike, kind of like Cousin Shane, he was out late. They may have been partying together for all I know, but still a great one. Had to warm him up a little bit, but here's Mike Uva from Gamecock Central. We're back. Mike Uva, Gamecock Central on 3. Been a year since we've seen you here in person. Thanks so much for joining us. You said it's been a whirlwind. How's Nashville been treating you?
No, it's been good. Second time in Nashville. First time I was here was for the SEC women's basketball tournament. Went down Broadway. Even though we still have, month to go until the season starts. I'm 0-1. Broadway beat me last night. Beat me bad. But it was a lot of fun. It's always cool to be able to run into people like yourself and be able to catch up with so many familiar faces and names.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to give you a layup here, and I've already seen you make this joke online. So
I wasn't a great lefty layupper, so this might not be great.
So why, of all days, today, Tennessee's here, but why did South Carolina bring a punter to this event? You already know the answer, right?
Well, Kai Kroger, if anyone had an opportunity to listen to him, let's say they didn't pay attention to South Carolina.
Yeah.
He is phenomenal. He's a game changer. And we hear so much about Beamer Ball. Beamer Ball 2.0 is what the program has been starting to promote over the last couple months. But you go back and you look at some of the games that South Carolina was in last year, and the ones that just jump out to me, I think of the Georgia State game week 1. 2 block punts, return for touchdowns. I think of the Clemson game, of course. Kai playing a big role with that, with punting. there were so many games last season where special teams, if one or two things don't go their way from a special team standpoint, South Carolina easily could have finished the season 5-7.
Oh, yeah.
So from a special team standpoint, he is as good as they come. And the crazy thing about it, too, is just that they actually have all their specialists coming back, their starters. They have their long snapper, they have their kicker as well. And I know it gets overlooked with special teams, but it truly is a third of the game. And if you can have good specialists and they're doing their thing, I mean, how many times with Alabama over the years, right? Like how talented those teams were, but the kicking game, it screwed up some of those games. Yeah. So I just say that because from a special teams standpoint, and they have one of the best special teams mind in Pete Lembo, special teams coordinator, certainly it's a strong point for them.
Yeah.
But Beamer bringing Kroger, and I know I'm kind of rambling here, but bringing Kroger here, it sends that message, hey, we're not just talking about it, we are about it, and we're going to bring a specialist today.
I'm very disappointed in you.
Yeah, I thought it was the Tennessee one there.
You were supposed to say because Tennessee – they didn't even know they had a damn punter after last year.
Here I am, like, trying to give, like, a really good answer, and you're like, all right, Mike.
That's what I'm saying. It was a layup for you.
Yeah, they didn't get to see Kai last year.
We appreciate the 5-minute answer on the kicker there.
Man, I was just rambling about 5 minutes in special teams.
I do want to ask you, because we've had a lot of folks on here. South Carolina's been a hot topic this week, mainly from Mizzou, mainly from Tennessee. I mean, anybody and everybody.
Yeah.
And one of the most popular takes right now is that if there were a team that needs to tamper expectations, it's South Carolina. Please tell me why they're wrong.
I think where they are right now from a confidence standpoint, and it's not just the team, I'm talking about the fan base, they have higher expectations. Yeah. Now, when I say they have higher expectations, does that mean it's the same as Georgia? Does that mean it's the same as Alabama or LSU heading into this season? Certainly they're not. They're not probably where Clemson is, even though they beat Clemson last year. And I know Gamecock fans don't want to necessarily hear that, but that's just the reality. What they're building right now is still the foundation, right? I think back to, because I covered the entire tenure of the Will Muschamp era, year 3 is really when things turn sideways. They had a phenomenal year 2. They had a lot of talent on that team as well. They won that Outback Bowl, but they weren't able to do anything with it heading into year 3.
Yeah.
So I think the big thing for South Carolina, and I've said this numerous times throughout the course of the summer, I haven't put my predictions yet in terms of what their record's going to be. I'm going back and forth between 7 and 8 wins. I think if you can get to that 7-win mark, though, that's still good.
Yeah.
Big thing this year is just continuing to be consistent. That's what you want to be able to show your recruits.
Yeah.
You want to show the fan base. I'm sure if they had 7 wins this year, there'd be some people that would be disappointed, people that feel like the world's coming to an end. But then again, that's SEC football.
Yeah, and with the hesitancy of the 8, there's probably a lingering question. Like I need to know ABC. Maybe it's the offensive line. Maybe is there something that, hey, if this group steps up and overachieves, then 8 is very feasible.
The offensive line in particular. I know it's real easy just to look at the running back room, but at the end of the day, I mean, this isn't 1980. Yeah. This isn't the 1990s. Certainly you want to be able to have a running game. It makes an impact because if you're a one-trick pony and you're just passing, defensive linemen are just going to put their hands in the dirt, and they're going to know that it's going to be pass, pass, pass. It makes their life a hell of a lot easier. It's kind of like a pitcher who's just throwing fastballs, right? So I think with the offensive line, they have some talented guys. Nick Gargiulo is one guy that's going to get overlooked because he's transferring in for Yale. That kid is an absolute tank.
Yeah.
Finishing first from an offensive line standpoint in drills, and just like he's just fast. He's physical. My old college coach, who's now the head coach at Holy Cross and has done a tremendous job, they had a game plan against him the last couple of years, and he told me once he arrived here, he's like, this guy had no business being in the Ivy League. And he was the only captain of Yale's team last year. So, I mean, he's going to bring some leadership. If they can figure that out early, that's the biggest question. And unfortunately, and no disrespect to the Georgia States of the world, but you don't have that powder cuff game week 1.
Right.
You go up against a Power 5 team and a very good team in North Carolina. And I know some Gamecock fans, they want to talk, well, they don't have a defense. That's great.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you need to be able to move the football. And that offensive line and I asked Rattler that. I said, how do you overcome that early on? And he said, it's the communication, making sure that guys are comfortable with what they're doing. And if they can do that, then they'll be able to beat North Carolina. If they don't, then I can see them losing to North Carolina, and that's kind of where that 7-8 mark I keep going back and forth on.
Is that game personal? I'm sorry, Mike. I've always
go
curious.
ahead, Shane. Go ahead.
I had Rattler here. I didn't get a chance to talk to him. Fantastic quarterback. But Mike started off, having him pretty low in his QB ratings. I've been on record thinking Spencer's better than what people are saying. But going into that North Carolina game, they're going against another quarterback that everyone has on top of their board. Does that game, just with your conversations with Rattler, do you feel like it's a little bit more personal because here he is coming into a nerve situation as an underdog, not so much for the team, but as quarterback play?
I'm sure. And, there's been so much made out about Rattler and his character the last couple of years. The guy's awesome. I mean, he really is. You talk to any of his teammates, he's like, this guy is like the ideal teammate. Like, he's always, team first and this and that, like just little things behind the scene. Yeah. I bring that up, though, because I keep thinking of a conversation I had with Marcus Lattimore, former Gamecock running back, and we do a podcast together. And one thing that he brought up is when you go into a game, and he mentioned it from a running back standpoint, but I'm sure it would apply with this as well. When you go into a game and you hear so much all week about the opposing running back, right? You're the running back, but you're hearing so much about Team X's running back, it motivates you. So I'm sure heading into this game, they're going to be talking about May, and obviously he's a phenomenal quarterback. That will probably light Rattler and give him that spark. The big thing is, though, and I think he realized it, don't try to do too much. Yeah. Be you, right? Be you. And I think with Dow Loggins coming in here, he understands he's not going to try to force things. I think that was the issue with the old offensive coordinator, Marcus Satterfield, that he tried to force certain things with this offense that he just couldn't do. It's like you wanted to cook a steak, but you wanted to cook a cake, but you had steak ingredients. You're a little backwards there. Again, chalk that up to Broadway for the win last night. So I think they have a better idea of who they are. Yeah. And Dow Loggins, from everyone I've talked to, Alshon Jeffrey. I mean, that's the other thing, too. You hear so much about people talking about what this guy did in the NFL as an offensive coordinator. I know it's not apples to apples. How was Nick Saban's career in the NFL? Well, he's a pretty good college coach, right? Like, let's give this guy an opportunity first before we say, wow, he was the Jets and Bears. And some of the teams you're mentioning, too, you don't even have to be an NFL fan to know he was walking into situations that weren't great. Yeah. I mean, it's not the greatest of situations.
What's your confidence level that South Carolina can be more consistent this year? Because I think that's a fair criticism. But like
across the board or offensively, you're just
pretty much across the board. And obviously with Spencer, you have to think the offense is critical. With new offensive coordinator, but aside from the coordinator, like you said, special teams back, defensive coordinator back, head coach obviously, a lot of continuity. And it's going to be a little bit more difficult, I think, because right out the gate, we already referenced North Carolina, at Georgia, at Tennessee, and don't forget, you just can't completely overlook Mississippi State, even though that's in Williams-Brice. Those are all losable games if you don't show up and you're not consistent. What gives you confidence that South Carolina can be consistent right out the gate?
I just think from an offensive standpoint, right? You look at all three phases. From an offensive standpoint, they're going to simplify things. And I think with Rattler, we saw that. We heard so much. It's real cliche to say, but it truly did come down to them just simplifying the offense those last two regular season games, to be able to do what they did against Tennessee, to do what they did against Clemson. Yeah. And I think with Rattler, too, and he might not say this, but it just felt like when he got to South Carolina last year, again, we talked about it before, where he felt maybe he was trying to do too much, trying to prove to people, like, hey, this is how good I am. I think he didn't have a true understanding of how different it was going to be with the offensive line, some of the lack thereof of talent at wide receiver. I mean, there was certainly some talent, but the lack thereof, especially early on in the year. And I think with Rattler, that clock that you have as a quarterback in your head, if you go back, and especially the first couple of games, and I know you're going up against Georgia, early in the year, and it didn't matter who you put out there at the start of the year. Georgia was going to blow out anybody. He just didn't seem comfortable in the pocket. It seemed like he would escape way too early. He would take his eyes from being downfield to just going into run mode. Or he would take off a little bit too late because of his offensive line. It was kind of like, all right, this is what I'm used to at Oklahoma. I should be able to have this extra time. No, okay? So I think the O-line is still next season it should be very good because you have so much young talent.
Yeah.
The only problem is when you have so much young talent recruiting, doesn't mean it's going to be good right now. And again, that's not to say the O-line can't be good, but it's just a major question mark. But special teams, I think the biggest thing with them is just making sure you don't take a step back. And Beamer, we were talking about it during the pressers today. You have a target on your back now.
Yeah.
Okay, Beamer ball, we hear all that. That's cute. But now, number 1 in the country last year for special teams efficiency. A lot of fakes in there.
No,
I mean, that punter. And defensively, just need to stop the run. I mean, it's just if they can do that and they feel like they have been able to make adjustments with that, it's not just the D-line. I think the linebacker room is a question mark in the middle as well.
I like the
I know I'm going all over the place here.
Yeah, no. I want. Speaking of, let me just take a quick left turn here. The what do you call it? The damn marketing team on.
Oh yeah, Justin King and company.
I want to make sure I have the exact name
Sopranos
right.
video.
The creative media department.
These boys need a raise. And is Beamer? is Beamer? I mean, is he?
He's
part
their
of
agent.
this?
No.
Yeah, I'm just saying, man. It blows my mind because South Carolina. When you look at some of these big recruiting budgets and stuff like that, you got to be creative, and that's one thing that I'm seeing out of South Carolina is just creativity.
Yeah.
Especially for the next chapter. Us old farts, man. Times are changing. I've been trying to figure out.
You don't have to tell me that again. Broadway, they're undefeated. When you hit that 30 mark and you get over, you rebound a little bit differently.
I work on a video so hard, and I get it out there on TikTok. It gets like 200 looks. My daughter comes out with an 8-second cat video, and she's got 10,000. I'm like, this next chapter of marketing and recruiting and stuff like that, it just feels like South Carolina is a couple steps ahead of other programs.
That's what you just said right there is spot on, which is they're ahead of it. Justin King, he was offered this position, I believe, in 2017, late in 2017. He came over either the beginning of 18 or at some point in 17. I might have the dates off a little bit. But from my understanding is that he originally turned the deal down from Ray Tanner. The athletic director reached out to, we want you to do this. Yeah. He turned it down originally. Eventually, after some convincing, he came aboard. And look, and I may have said this on this program before, I've had many conversations this week about it. Will Muschamp away from the camera is awesome.
Yeah.
I ran into him back in Massachusetts. He was recruiting a defensive back at my dad's high school. And I'm up in Boston covering the Patriots this fall. I'm doing both jobs. And I pull into the parking lot, and I see Muschamp there. And, it's kind of like the lights are dim and stuff. So I'm like, hey, Coach, don't you have a game tomorrow? Some coach you are. And he gives you that pissed-off Muschamp stare, and then he realized it was me, and we just shoot the shit. It was awesome. But, I bring that up because Muschamp, because of situations that took place at Florida, and he felt like he got burned at times when he was opening himself up, and then obviously when things took a turn, that's when things got thrown back in his face a little bit. Because of that, you didn't see that openness. And when you have someone like Justin King, like he goes to Beamer, and Beamer hardly ever says no. Yeah. So I bring that up, and it's not to blame Will Muschamp. I mean, there's plenty of our subscribers on Gamecock Central's message board that will do that every day still. But the thing about it is you need a coach. Like you can have, like the old cliche, like you can have the tools, but you need the toolbox too, right? So like the fact that Beamer lets him do all this stuff, the fact that he works with him like literally hand in hand, Muschamp, it was just a little different. And because of that, because of this relationship, you've really seen things take off since Beamer has arrived. Because he understands it. Going back to that's just where we are right now.
I think that helps him. And the portal, prime example.
Oh, yes.
Yep. I think these kids, that get this one last shot, they want to do it at a place they're comfortable with, and that's again.
And it's
that's
authentic too.
Absolutely,
it's authentic. It's
now,
not
everybody
this
else hates
card.
it.
Yeah,
everybody else hates it. But if you're on that campus and you're talking to these kids, they're in love with the coach.
I think that makes it more beloved by the fans too.
Yeah.
Who the hell cares what everybody else thinks? But speaking of unpopular coaches in Columbia, how bad does Beamer want to beat Eli Drinkwitz in Mizzou this year?
Oh, I'm sure. And I just found out I think I'm going to be heading out to Missouri this year. First time going to Missouri, yeah. Cool. I'd be lying to you if I said that was on the top of my bucket list of places I want to go ever. But, no, look, the bottom line is this: we're talking about that 7-8 win mark.
Yeah.
At least for me, when I look at the schedule, even this past year, that game, it doesn't make sense for South Carolina not to be able to win. Mm-hmm. Okay, obviously this year they have to go out to Columbia. They have to go out to Texas A&M this year as well. I think that's actually back-to-back weeks of travel, which is going to be insane. But when you just look at the game for what it is, right, take the travel out, South Carolina should win that game. However, Missouri, kind of like Kentucky for a period of time, and I'd still say still is, right? We have to see what happens. Can you have that consistency? Can you continue to beat Kentucky? Just beat them once. That doesn't mean anything. You got to be consistent. Texas A&M. Right. Missouri just has been that thorn in the Gamecocks' backside, and it just makes zero sense. Zero sense. The way that they performed last year at South Carolina, give the Tigers credit.
Yeah.
USC, kind of like that Florida game, you look at that, it's just like, how the hell is that the same team that beat Clemson and then did what they did against Tennessee? It makes no sense. So with them, it's just coming out and being the team that they should be. Yeah. Not shooting yourself in the foot, and being the team that they believe they can be, and not this team that just, and that's the other issue, consistency. You can't just turn into a puddle. Yeah, right? You just can't turn into a puddle in some of these games that you just expect to win. And I'm not saying USC expects to win, but in comparison to going up against the Georgias, the Tennessees of the world.
Yeah. My last question.
Yes, sir.
Where's a good place to get a chicken biscuit?
Oh, Bojangles.
Yeah, that's right.
I was like, come on, where's my coupon?
Bojangles, got to feed the boys.
Thank
so
you,
they sent me like 2,300 of these things.
Wow.
The only thing that you got to know.
Ironically, that's how many I had last year.
I don't know how many you want here. We'll just give everyone about like 3.
Thank you.
Just got to use it before the end of the year.
No problem.
Okay.
Again, my Al Bundy moment. That is my Pokai moment. It's all downhill for me from there.
Absolutely. You tried the steak biscuit's not bad either.
I've had that.
Yeah, not bad. So, I'm sorry, I'm getting hungry again.
Yeah. Last question for you, Mike.
Yes.
Really appreciate your time. What Beamer has done in South Carolina is remarkable so far. And I think the best thing for the fans, he snapped a lot of these streaks. Mm-hmm. There's only 2 more that he's missing, Mizzou and Georgia. And hell, no one's beaten Georgia lately. They've been so dominant. So what streaks is it vitally important that that don't flip back the other way? And let's remove Clemson off, because I think that's
I was going to say
an easy answer.
Starts with
I'm
Clemson.
thinking just SEC. Is it Tennessee? Is it Kentucky? Is it A&M? Because a lot of the buzz we hear is South Carolina could be an even better football team, but the record may not reflect it. Could be the same record or maybe even slightly worse, but still a better team because the schedule's such a gauntlet. If there's one game in conference play that Shane Beamer and company really want to keep on their side, what's that one game for you?
I think the challenging part is with divisions going away starting next year, maybe – you look at it just a little differently in comparison to how you're looking at it right now. Mm-hmm. But with that being said, I still think if you think of a team like Tennessee, you think of a team like Kentucky, those are the teams where USC is like that. When you look at it and you just lay it all out, right? Get rid of the divisions right now. Mm-hmm. That's kind of where they are from like a pack standpoint. Tennessee, obviously, and that's no disrespect to the Vols, but my point being is they feel like that's the next step, right? Like you beat Kentucky, you want to continue to go up the stairs. So I don't know where that gap is between South Carolina and Tennessee. Certainly USC had a phenomenal game against them last year. I think Tennessee is a hell of a lot better of a team than what we saw last year. I think we'd all agree with that. But my point being is you're somewhere in the middle of making sure that, okay, we got to take care of Kentucky, but Tennessee's that next team. And again, divisions are going away, so it makes things a little funky, but at least the way you're looking at it right now from an East standpoint, that's the team that you want to be able to finish in front of. And I think as challenging as that's going to be, if you're able to do that and you're able to beat a Kentucky, 2 years in a row, you're able to beat a Tennessee 2 years in a row, now you're able to get some momentum because it's so much easier when you're winning, obviously, right? Shoot, breaking news. What did goodness, I'm trying to think who it was a couple years ago. It's you want to win, you don't want to lose. Remember that phrase on ESPN? It was just like no shit. But if they're able to get up to that point, and now you're able to continue to win against these schools, these are the schools that you're going up against from a recruiting standpoint. I know Georgia's closer. I know there's some other plays from a proximity standpoint. But at the same time, too, Georgia, Alabama, Clemson, those guys are getting whoever they want right now. Tennessee, they're doing a really good job, but they're not on that level yet of recruiting. You need to do what you can to make sure that that doesn't happen. And what's the best way to do that? Beat them consistently.
Yeah. All right, Mike, really appreciate you. Before you go, tell the audience, where can they find all your work?
Yeah, you can follow me over on GamecockCentral.com, and if you're on Twitter, Mike_UVA.
Appreciate you, brother.
Appreciate it, fellas. Thank you.
I can't believe Mike missed that layup I gave him to bash Tennessee. He didn't take it, though. But, all right, last South Carolina interview. Let's kick it over to Chris Phillips, Spurs Up Show. This was a good one. People give Chris hell, but I think he does a good job, at least from what I've seen. And he certainly does a good job with this interview. So let's kick it over to Chris Phillips. All right, here with Chris Phillips, Spurs Up Show. Is this your first time at Media Days?
First time at SEC Media Days,
Wow, you just got to talk to Brian Kelly.
Yeah, ask him. I should have asked him, why'd you steal Logan Diggs from Carolina, because the Gamecocks in a running game. But, no, I'm just happy to be here, man. Truly, it's a balance of, covering the events, obviously taking it all in, though, at the same time, because it's something that, I've been watching SEC Media Days forever, and I told the story on our show that, I remember vividly sitting on my couch in 2014. This is obviously way pre-TSUS or any type of content, if you will, in my life, but watching the event and thinking to myself how cool it would be to, number one, be covering the event full-time, talking sports for a living.
Yeah.
Number two, being there in person, and so to actually be here is, yesterday I was kind of, it was a surreal experience, and I was like, God, what if they sent the email to the wrong guy? They're going to tell me, like, who are you? Get out of here. So, no, it's happy to be here and sitting with you guys, and really that's the cool thing, too, is shaking hands with so many people that I've had on the show and interacted with on social media. So to be in the presence of so many talented content creators or just people in this space is a really cool thing. So
I think that's the biggest one. I was joking with somebody the other day that we should all have our Twitter handles somewhere, because a lot of times folks will walk by and Mike's like, hey, you didn't recognize Zoot? And I was like, I have no idea. I'm not good with names and faces. I'm good with Twitter handles.
It's like college football Twitter just came. I saw Hendon Hooker, too. I mean, we got the stars are out in Nashville, man.
Yeah, so. He was up here. He was just over here promoting the Bush's Baked Beans. Yeah, right in my backyard.
Hey, let's not sell them. They're not paying us.
No,
No free ads, boys.
Yeah.
No free ads.
What's hell of a chili starter. I'm just throwing that out there in case they are listening.
What's your hottest South Carolina take?
Hottest South Carolina take. I would have to say it's the L that I picked to Mississippi State in Week 4. That's got to be. I have not caught a great reception from Gamecock fans on that one. But, I look at that game, and number one, I feel like at this point, and Shane Beamer's doing great things, obviously going into his third season, which is pivotal, but do we really put it past South Carolina to potentially lose a game like that? I mean, after losing to Mizzou last year, and I think Mississippi State's a team that I understand the period of transition, and nobody really knows what we're going to get because transitioning from that air raid offense to, more of a balanced attack, running the football, if you will. But I still think Will Rogers is one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC. And, it's one of those things, I mean, you guys know, I think what's interesting when you predict games, you sit down and you say, like an individual game, you look at it differently than where does a game fall in the schedule? Who does a team play after this team? Are they coming off a bye week? What point in the schedule is it, et cetera? So, new offensive coordinator, they're figuring things out early. So I look at that game, South Carolina, coming off the beat down at Georgia, which is probably coming. I don't think that's a hot take. Right. Going to be a tough game, physical game. Gamecocks will come home. That one, to me, just got the noon game written all over, and I think Mississippi State is a team. I think weird things are going to happen with the Bulldogs this year with the spirit of the pirate living on. I would not be surprised if State pulls an upset or two. I mean, I've got the Gamecocks at 7-5. I do have that Mississippi State game as an L, and I've got Carolina doing what they've done under Beamer, which is starting out sort of slowish, if you will, and then catching fire late in the season. I've got them beating Mizzou, beating Kentucky, but that Mississippi State game is not one that sat well with folks. But I think the Gamecocks have real issues on the line of scrimmage, man, and I view Mississippi State similar to North Carolina, but better on the lines of scrimmage. Yeah. I know State still lost a lot, but UNC's not going to have the bodies to expose them up front. I think State could have those bodies. And I think people are going to look at Georgia as sort of a measuring stick game, and you're going to find out where your deficiencies are, where you still have a long way to go. But I think State's more kind of that game as far as, okay, this is kind of where we are, a team, SEC team on our level. How do we stack up? So, again, short answer, picking an L to Mississippi State has not sat well with the Gamecock fan base.
That Tennessee game last year, how high does that rate on the greatest nights of your life?
Hey, you really want to bring that up? Talk about that? I know I listened to Cousin Shane. There it is. There's his signature. He needs to pop one now. Because I know you guys have brought up, you get reminded about it pretty much every single day. And it's funny, I actually had a guy over from Channel Tennessee on, we're doing our SEC team previews, and, I asked him how many times you heard about it. He's like, I've had to mute more people than you could imagine on the Twitter app. But, no, being there in that building, you guys know, I picked Tennessee to win that game 59-13.
Everybody
I
did.
gave the Gamecocks no chance, and, I had to eat it the following week. And like you said, nobody gave South Carolina any sort of chance after that Florida game. And, witnessing it in person, I was like, okay, at some point Tennessee's going to get it going. They're going to make a late comeback, and it never happened. And Spencer Rattler, I put that right up there with the greatest performances in school history. Obviously, what Stephen Garcia did against Alabama in 2010, but that was, I think Spencer Rattler would have probably beaten anybody in college football that night. So storming the field was the really, really cool part. I got a piece of the Willie B. Hedges in the studio actually framed.
That's
so.
Cool.
It's one of those really cool things. I just think to myself, when are we going to storm the field again? Because Greg Sankey talking about the fines, and I was wondering when he was talking about that, should I start booing right after the that'd be a great SEC Media Days debut. But no, it's for me, it's up there at the top for sure. It's one of the top 2 or 3 I'd say experiences I've ever had. As a South Carolina fan inside Williams-Brice.
I want to piggyback off that, because not only did you end well with Tennessee and Clemson, more importantly, but what does that do for expectations going into this season? Because I'm telling you right now, man, I've talked to a lot of Gamecock fans, and if it's like short of 10 wins, they're going to be pissed off. So I'm just kind of curious, your perspective, where should those expectations be, and should we tamper those a little bit, or should we embrace that we're here now?
I think if South Carolina can get back to 8 wins under Shane Beamer in year 3, I think that would be a massive success. And I think what that would do and why it's so pivotal is it would set that as sort of the new benchmark. We all know South Carolina historically has been a 5-7, 6-6 program. They've just kind of floated or waddled around in mediocrity. You go 8-4 again this year and show that what you did last year wasn't any sort of fluke the last 2 games, because that's what's going to happen, right? If you start out slow or you play poor, people are going to say that was a fluke, right? Especially Tennessee fans. But anyways, if you can get back to that 8-win mark and certainly exceed that, I think you're setting sort of that new bar at South Carolina. And I'm not saying, because I've picked 7-5, I don't think that would be a failure. I look at this team, very similarly to last year in regards to, I think you're probably a little bit better offensively. I think you could potentially take a step back defensively. I love the addition of Travion Robertson at the D-line coach spot, but I just got to see the run game stop somebody before I say they're going to make some huge leap. So, I think expectations, it's interesting. I feel like the hype train for South Carolina since January is actually somewhat lost a little bit of steam, fresh off that season, winning 8 games, even with the bowl loss in Notre Dame. You had people, my way too early expectations or predictions. I had 9-3 back in January. And then I think it's like as we get closer, the warts start to become more obvious, the question marks start to become greater. And the closer you are to the program, obviously, of all the question marks and deficiencies or potential deficiencies. So, I think expecting this team to get back to 8 wins is fair. Because I think at some point, obviously, you've just got to overcome all the doubt. You got to break through. And I said that last year, too. At some point, you can't just keep saying, okay, well, you should lose this one. You got to win some games you shouldn't. And I think that's the factor Shane Beamer has brought in, that, they love being the underdog. Tennessee, Clemson, nobody gave him a shot. You look throughout his tenure, they did the same thing to Auburn, to Florida, to North Carolina, and the Duke's Mayo Bowl in his first year. So all they've done in his first 2 years is overachieve, and they'll look to do the same. But I think setting the expectations at 8 is fair. Guys, I think anything beyond that is probably asking a little bit too much.
And you can't afford a slow start. So, you got North Carolina week 1. How important is that game?
It's a pivotal game. And it's a tale of 2 teams, because North Carolina lost their last 4 in a row. South Carolina, the way they finished the season, even with the Gator Bowl loss, whatever, it is what it is. But the way the Gamecocks finished versus the way UNC finished, very different. And, again, we just had Andrew Jones, a Tar Heel Illustrator, on the show, and he talked about the importance for them, too. So a lot of people want to label it the most important game of the season for South Carolina. I wouldn't go that far, because we've just seen the Gamecocks under Shane Beamer. One of the traits of a well-coached football team is they get better as the season goes on, and they've done that, right? So I think South Carolina, even if they lose to UNC, they could steal one. Maybe in Knoxville? No, they could steal. They could steal one late in the season again, like a Mizzou, a Kentucky, maybe a Clemson again, right? And get back to the 7 or 8 win range. But I think if you're going to meet the expectations of Gamecock fans, get to that 8-win spot, you probably do need to beat North Carolina because I don't think it's going to be a good sign moving forward. The competition obviously only gets stiffer, but it'll be a great test for South Carolina. I've talked about it. I'm already picking the Gamecocks to win that game because I don't think UNC has those bodies in the line of scrimmage to necessarily expose them. But you got 2 brand new corners too, and Drake May, if there's not a pass rush, he's going to pick you and everybody else apart. So it's a huge game, no doubt. I think a tone setter for both programs.
Do you think that's the biggest challenge for Beamer and company is consistency? Because they snapped so many streaks. They basically snapped them all short of Georgia, and no one's beaten Georgia. Right. So, he's got to beat Clemson again, A&M, Tennessee, Kentucky, Florida. I mean, he's beaten all these teams. I'm not saying they're going to lose to all of them, but if any one of those, I think some Carolina fans, particularly Clemson and maybe Tennessee, if you lose to those, it's almost like, I don't know if the program's really taking a step back, but it may feel like that to some fans. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, the way fans, I think, justify progress, too, maybe is unfair in some instances, right? I look at it this way, and I viewed Shane Beamer's first 5 years as such. As long as you're making bowl games and you're recruiting at a top 20 level, because that's where it's won and lost, man. It's Jimmy's and Joe's. I mean, you can bring in – I don't think Marcus Satterfield was very good. I obviously wanted him out of Columbia. But until you have the Jimmys and Joes on the offensive line, the line of scrimmage, which they're recruiting, you're not going to run the football consistently. And also, too, you speak to consistency, and I talk about it, you talk about it, we all talk about it when it comes to the Gamecocks. But there's a lot of teams, those middle-of-the-pack SEC teams, that are fighting for consistency. I mean, we could use that word with so many of them. But, I think, guys, again, until you improve in the line of scrimmage, it's going to be hard to find consistency because I think you run into matchups that – in Missouri, for example, no Gamecock fan out there thinks that South Carolina should be losing to Mizzou. Gamecock fans look at Mizzou as below South Carolina football. I saw a tweet today.
It's kind of like they used to do that to Kentucky.
Exactly,
though, right?
And that's become the new Kentucky streak. I think it was even a tweet to you that said, even if we lose to Missouri, Missouri's not better than us. And I was like, who's going to tell him that's not how football works, right? So it's one of those things where, snapping streaks is pivotal, and that's certainly one I think is right at their top of the priority list. It's hard to, and this is no disrespect to Mizzou, but I felt the same way about Kentucky. It's just it's hard to convince people that you're really on the up and up as a program if you lose this year a 5-game losing streak to Missouri Tigers, or when you had a 6-game losing streak to Kentucky. It's just really hard to convince people that, hey, we're next up, number 2 in the East, challenging Georgia. You know what I mean? So definitely showing more consistency is something, though, they need to do as a program. Defensively stopping the run, offensively run the football. But Spencer Rattler, which you guys have talked about a lot, I know you caught some flack for having him, 9th in your postseason rankings, which it is funny, by the way, to both of you that people, it's funny to watch people on Twitter or on social media that don't read the fine print, that you guys are doing a podcast like we're doing this from this team's perspective, win, toss, loss, and then they go different, or you're doing the quarterback rankings, but they don't realize for win, and it's like people just lose their minds. It's kind of funny to watch people eat themselves alive like that.
I told Mike I could not wait for that segment to be over with, so I didn't have to explain it anymore. But it was awesome, seriously. And as a fan perspective, when we did South Carolina, I think you got some great pieces, man. I like this Knox kid. I love Wells. I think Juice is one player that's not getting the recognition he deserves. But, you've got some pieces. It just needs some emerging talent to step up, mainly on the offensive line, defensive front.
Yeah, the offensive line to me is just the biggest question. And, I mean, I know it's lather, rinse, repeat, and I know Gamecock fans get so tired of hearing about it. And Shane Beamer, give him all the credit in the world. They're doing everything they can to address that in recruiting. But when you lose Jalen Nichols in the spring game, which was just devastating to see, and he's going to be out minimum the majority of the season. So, can you rely on the transfers like Nick Gargiulo from Yale, Jackson Hughes from Charlotte, the Mercer transfer whose name escapes me, and then a bunch of guys who, have played for you, but, again, this is returning from an offensive line last year that ranked outside the top 100 in rushing offense. So, for me, guys, there's a lot of reasons, and I think Dowell Loggins, if South Carolina is able to get it going early, which, by the way, you think to yourself, new OC, there's a grace period. Right. Absolutely not. No, I think people are expecting right out the jump, you play a porous North Carolina defense. I think you have to score 30-plus to win the game. Furman expecting fireworks. I mean, Georgia's going to be Georgia, but then Mississippi State, we're kind of off and running. So I think people are expecting that with Spencer Rattler, Juice Wells back, like you mentioned, because there are pieces there are weapons. There's going to be no excuse, even with the offensive line troubles, there's going to be no excuse for South Carolina not to be an explosive offense. So it does come back to the line of scrimmage, but if Dowell Loggins somehow can scheme around that, make some things happen, just find enough of a running game to present the maybe the illusion of balance, because that's what my biggest fear is, that South Carolina's going to get in some games where, I mean, you guys know, I don't care what pieces you have. If you get one-dimensional and a defense knows what you're going to do, you don't have much of a chance.
And at times you did last year.
Right, for sure. And that's where the inconsistencies come in. I think that's where you see South Carolina have a Missouri game where they scored 10 points and they look lost. And hopefully there's going to be less of that with the Dowell Loggins experience in Columbia. You know, obviously Marcus Satterfield, that's another dirty word in Columbia, I feel like. But no, it's you know, there's definitely pieces to succeed there, both offensively, defensively. And again, it's a lot like these other middle of the pack teams. There's reasons that you could say South Carolina could be the breakout team and go 9-3, and there's a lot of reasons you could say they could go 6-6. So, I mean, it's kind of like, what do we get?
Well, and I think with Loggins, we're not reinventing the wheel here.
Right.
We just need to build off what was working last year.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, Beamer said that a few times. So I think
what's your honest thoughts on that, on that hire and everything? I mean, is it wait and see? I mean, because I think, I mean, I get there's people with Gamecock glasses on, but I think the fairest thing is just complete wait and see, because he's a complete unknown in college football, calling plays.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. And I think to call it anything other than a question mark would be, again, having Gamecock bias. And I was someone that, again, maybe it wasn't a popular take, but I don't try to give the popular take. I just try to give my honest take. And when Dowell Loggins was hired, I mean, guys, I'd never heard of Dowell Loggins when that name came up. And, you know, it's a question mark.
But
I mean, bottom line,
that doesn't guarantee it's bad either.
Exactly.
I didn't know who the hell was Joe Brady. I never heard of that guy.
They've said, and
Liam
they said all
Cohen. I never heard of that guy.
They said all the right things in his introductory presser, simplifying, getting the playmakers, continue. To your point, I don't think they're reinventing the offense at all. I think they want to take what they did well in the last 3 games of the season, because you look at Spencer Rattler, I think he was at 8 touchdowns, 9 picks in the first 10 games, and 10 touchdowns and 3 picks in the last 3. Right. So taking what you did in those last 3 games, carrying that over, he's going to Dowell put his own wrinkles in it. They're going to obviously, as a staff, put new wrinkles in it going in the season, but making things easy and simple for Spencer Rattler, Juice Wells, the playmakers on this football team, to simply go out and make big plays. But, you know, again, to answer your question, I mean, I think it's a question mark. I do. I think it's you've got to trust Shane Beamer if you're a Gamecock fan. To call it anything other than a roll of the dice, I think is just, again, unfair. This is a guy that we got to give both sides of the story. He was named the worst play caller in the NFL. The NFL's not college, but this is a guy that's never called a play at the collegiate level, not just Power 5, not just SEC, but collegiate level. My biggest thing, Mike, is this. You know, most of these coaches, or all these coaches, they start out with their script, 15, 20 plays. What do you do late in a ball game when it's a situational type deal, and in-game play calling, having that killer instinct? I think that's something you just don't know until it happens. So, to your point, Dowell Loggins could work out and be the best thing since sliced bread, or it could go the other way. And it's a pivotal hire for Shane Beamer, man, because the last thing you want is, if you miss on a second OC, to be labeled, well, this guy's charismatic, he can recruit, he's a great coach, all things considered, but he cannot identify a good offensive coach, or he just can't land one. Yeah. So I'm not saying that's going to happen. I think nobody can be worse than Marcus Satterfield, but just how much of an upgrade is he, we shall see.
Yeah. Well, let's sit here and say Spencer Rattler is first-team All-SEC at the end of the season. What has happened to get that done? And if I'm guaranteeing you that happens, what will South Carolina's record be?
What will have to happen to get that done is the offensive line will just have to step up and give him time to throw. Also, they don't have to be an elite running game, just I'd say top 10 in the SEC. I mean, the expectations are low. My expectations for the running game, just finish inside the top 100 nationally. That would be a step forward, obviously. So give him some sort of balance, but also, keep things simple to where he and Juice Wells, Trey Knox, Nicholas Harbor, Amarian Brown, DeCarrion Jordan at the running back position can go out, make plays, and flourish. And if he's first team All-SEC, guys, I mean, South Carolina's a 9-3. I mean, they might be a 10-2 team. I mean, truly. So, I think if that were to happen, the offensive line just simply has got to step up, give him time. More of what we saw in the Tennessee and the Clemson games, and much less of what we saw in the 10 games previous.
You got one last question, Shane? Because I got one, but I want to save it to last here.
No, I like the perspective, and because we've been singing the same thing, and I really think that for South Carolina to take that next step, that Loggins-Rattler relationship has got to blossom. You were talking about what happens 15, 20 plays in, I think at that point, if you got a quarterback like Rattler, as good as we think Eddie is, how much freedom does he have at the line of scrimmage? So, that's the growth I want to see, because he came back for a reason. He wants to go to the NFL. this is an opportunity for him to prove to the NFL that he's capable of running a team.
And that's a great point you make, Cousin Shane, too. Is I mean, this is such a big
can
year.
You say
for
that
him.
again to the camera?
Cousin Shane made a great point, by the way. No, I mean, this is a huge year for him personally. And
Yeah.
Juice Wells. This is a money year, man. Go out and get the bag.
This is it.
Like,
This is it.
Put up the numbers, put up the stats. So, I mean, surely there'll be plenty of motivation there. Again, having young guys step up, though, in the offense. Marquis Anderson on the offensive line, maybe a guy you got to just thrust in there and play him immediately. He was a big-time 4-star signee. Nicholas Harbor on the outside, he's sort of an X factor that nobody knows what he can do. I think if he could put up 25 catches, that would be a really, really good freshman year as he sort of gets used to the nuances of the offensive scheme and the wide receiver position specifically. Could DeCarrion Joyner, who's a folk hero already in Columbia, be the emergence at running back? So, again, I always tell people this. There's the garnet glasses way of looking at things, and there's the chicken curse way of looking at things, and then there's right in the middle, which is where we all try to be, obviously.
Right.
And so there's so many question marks. Some things, they're going to overachieve, underachieve, be right as we expect. So you're just hoping more of these question marks work out in the positive than the negative.
Right, absolutely.
All right, Chris Phillips, Spurs Up Show. Last question for you. How many points does Tennessee beat South Carolina this year?
Well, if you go off my predictions, I think I said 17. I'll tell you guys this, and it's not because I'm trying to make you feel all warm and fuzzy inside. I broke these games down, and it's so funny, by the way, in wins, toss-ups, and losses. And, of course, I throw out the graphic, and I've got like 8 toss-ups for Carolina, and people are like, what a coward. He can't make a prediction. I'm like, the prediction graphic's coming in like 2 hours. Just give it a little bit. So I put Tennessee in that toss-up bucket. And I think after what happened last year, after we were just all so certain and sure there's no way the Gamecocks are beating Tennessee, I felt like it was unfair to put that as a sure L. Of all the toss-ups, that one to me is the one that I think is least likely to be a win for South Carolina. I mean, you guys know it. I've heard you talk. I've seen Tennessee Twitter. If there is one game that I expect Tennessee to show up and play their best, if there is one game that I expect Vol Nation to show up and pack out Neyland Stadium and be loud from probably 60 minutes before kickoff until they're partying down there at Beans down there in downtown Knoxville, it is the South Carolina game. And if that's a night game, God forbid. Tennessee probably brings the black jerseys back out. It'll be ghosts of old when Lane Kiffin did it back to them back in the late 2000s.
That's right.
I mean, listen, I think Tennessee, they're going to have that one circled. I mean, that's a huge game for both programs. They split 1-1 right now. Both programs feel like they're on the up and up. And I feel like if it's something, if South Carolina is able to do the unthinkable, beat Tennessee in Knoxville, maybe Shane Beamer's starting to tout, hey, I've got Josh Heupel's number. But
and they don't play again in 2024.
They don't play again. That's a very good point.
That's a lot of shit talking.
Trust me, it's been a long off season. You know, I can imagine 2 years of it.
But again, picking that game, I'd be stunned if the Gamecocks got that W. Just because of, again, that's a game where Tennessee could you argue that Tennessee was overlooking South Carolina? I don't know, but there's no chance that happens this year. No chance.
Before you go, Chris, can you tell our audience where to find all your work?
Yes, I'm Chris Phillips, the Spurs Up Show on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, everywhere else you can find anything. We do a daily live show on YouTube called The Daily Crow, which airs noon to 3, and we do take questions, comments, calls, if you will. So any Tennessee fans checking this out, y'all want to chime in? We have Georgia fans, Texas, you name it, call in, talking smack, but we're just talking ball, and podcasts drop daily on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. So we're all over at the Spurs Up Show, and Mike and Cousin Shane, I appreciate the opportunity, truly, man. This is awesome.
Yeah, glad having you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, perfect. All right, last but not least, let's kick it over to Ole Miss, where Lane Kiffin, I think he probably was out on Broadway himself. His hair was messed up. He was giving short answers. Didn't want to get into much, aside from talking about people's mothers, which was obviously hilarious. But one thing, and again, these are not great. It was like pulling teeth here to get good comments from Lane Kiffin, but I don't think enough people are talking about Quinshaw Junkins and what he could be for Ole Miss this season. Let's kick it over to Lane.
Here in Montgomery.
Right here doesn't help.
Sorry, right here. Quinshaw Junkins, what can you say about just the person that he is to be able to bring him as a sophomore and what he meant to your offense and your team last year?
Yeah, it's really amazing as a freshman to be able to do that and that many carries. I think he led the conference in carries, yards, and touchdowns. And to do that as a freshman, he has an elite mindset. And to be able to carry the ball that many times and late in games still running strong. So we actually think he can get a lot better, like anyone from their first to second year. So we're really excited to see that develop.
So again, Judkins, and a little backstory on him for those that don't know. It's well documented. I think he was a 3-star recruit. Lane Kiffin in the stands there, but most people have seen that photo. But where Judkins, who I believe he's from Alabama, I believe he played for a smaller school. He carried that team to a state title. And I think it was, this is a school that I do not believe is ever in contention for things of that nature. They won it with Judkins running the ball. And why I bring that up, it's what Kiffin says. This guy's got an elite mindset. It's very rare to have true sophomores at SEC Media Days. In fact, I can't really remember the last true sophomore that's come to the event. And if he can take over games, he's not Derrick Henry, he's not Leonard Fournette, he's different than those guys. But if he can have that kind of impact on the football game, Devon Awchain, which may be a bad one to bring up because they were so awful last year, but he certainly was not. Nick Chubb. These are the type of comparisons that Judkins is not getting now, but I think by the end of the season and the end of his career at Ole Miss, I think he could be in that same class, and it could really propel Ole Miss to heights that many people are not suspecting because they may have the best offensive weapon in all of college football in Judkins this fall. Now, I also think, I've been very clear on this show, I think Jackson Dart's in for a big year. I've got him number 3 in my quarterback rankings in the SEC. Let's kick it over to Lane Kiffin talking about year 2 with Jackson Dart in this system.
Coach, on Monday, Fadil Diggs said the quarterback he went up against that gave him the most troubles in edge rusher was Jackson Dart. I just want to ask, how has Dart developed since he came in from USC last year, and what do you expect from him in his second year at Ole Miss?
Well, Jackson's had a great offseason. Again, in this portal world, we just think everybody's going to be great right away, expectations. And so it was his first year in our system, and he was competing to be the starter all the way till, I think, the 3rd game of the year, or 4th game of the year. So he's really developed well on and off the field, become more of a leader, and we're really excited about him.
And then last little bit, this was pretty funny. I'll give it to him here, but Kiffin calls out Paul Feinbaum for saying he's always doubting Nick Saban, always dissing the greatest of all time. He's doing it again. And so Lane Kiffin insinuates, Alabama's just going to be damn awesome again this fall.
Coach Michael Bronner, WNSP in Mobile. You obviously have a pretty documented relationship with Nick Saban. I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit and just talk about how much he's meant in your coaching career.
Well, I'm extremely grateful to Coach Saban and our time together, and most importantly, him giving me an opportunity to learn from him. And, he's the best to ever do it. I've said it before. I really do believe he is the best coach to ever do it because, like you guys know in here, I take in all the information and look at it instead of just a record. He's done it in a time of scholarship limitations where some of those older coaches didn't have them, and they could. What if Nick Saban didn't have an 85 rule? What would his roster look like if he had 150 scholarships to give? And also, he's done what I don't think anybody did over time of do it continually with so much staff turnover. So many people are hired off of his staff. Other places are to be head coaches, and it's kind of like, man, all these first-round picks, and he loses these coordinators, that's why we have Feinbaum, so he can motivate him every other year and say, his dynasty's over, and this is the end of Saban, and then we're like, hey, thanks a lot for pissing him off. And Paul's always wrong on this subject, so, and he just did it again the other day. If he doesn't make the playoffs, he's not any good as a coach. So thanks, Paul.
All right. That was probably the best one, aside from his mother comment. That was the best one Lane Kiffin had at Media Days. But let's kick it over next to Michael Katz from the Daily Journal down there in Mississippi. Always a great time talking to our buddy Michael Katz.
Where should I be looking here?
Just anywhere.
You guys? Not?
Yeah,
okay.
Oh, yeah, whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
We don't care. we're not that crew. You know what I mean?
What kind of outfits you been hanging out with? You know? We're not even sure his camera's working.
It's plugged in though.
All right, Michael Katz here covering Ole Miss live from SEC Media Days. How's it going, brother? It's great to have you back on.
I can't believe the season is already here. I swear it was just like baseball season, and then I had 2 weeks off, and then I came back and I had 2 days back in Oxford, and it was like, all right, let's do football. It's crazy. It's exciting though. I'm really excited.
What's it like covering Ole Miss, given the fact that every offseason we say the same damn thing? Mm-hmm. No idea what to make of this team because of the portal. Now you got some coaching transition. Lane, the curveballs, everything, but specifically on the field, how the hell do you figure this team out in the offseason?
Well, I was talking to somebody else today, and I was like, Jackson Dart wasn't perfect last year, but he had a nice year, and you think it's all settled, and then you bring in a guy who started 4 years at Oklahoma State and a 4-star kid who played at LSU, and it's like it just gets more confusing every time, and it's never simple in Oxford. But I think this team is good.
Yeah.
But I think the schedule is really tough.
Mm-hmm.
That schedule last year looks pretty nice right now. They
got to ease Georgia out of the East.
Yeah, and I mean, last year they got to kind of ease into things. Their first real test was Kentucky in week 5 or 6. And they played Tulane week 2 this year. I'm a USC guy. I've been hurt personally by the Green Wave. That's not going to be an easy game. And they've got this stretch of, I don't know the order off the top of my head, but it's Arkansas, LSU, Bama, and Auburn. And that's brutal. The offense, Lane Kiffin offenses are always going to be. They're going to average 35 to 40. That's just what they're going to do.
Right.
The quarterback situation, I've been on the record. It's hard for me not to see it being Jackson Dart, just given everything we've heard. And, progression year 2, you expect him to take some steps. They've got one of the best running backs in the country. They're going to be fine there. The Pickall defense, we'll see how that looks. I think this team's going to be a lot better than it was last year, but I don't know if that equates to a better record, if that makes sense.
Let me ask about Jackson Dart, though, because I don't know if you've seen it. I put up my quarterback rankings. They always go viral.
Everyone's talking about it.
Everybody. But I got Jackson Dart 3rd.
Saw that.
And that I'm not saying today's the 3rd best. That's because that'd be crazy. But what I'm saying is at the end of the season, I think he could be regarded as the 3rd best quarterback in the SEC, playing for Lane Kiffin, having perhaps the best running back in the country next to him. Is that a crazy take, or could you, not that you're right there with me, but could you see that becoming the case that Jackson Dart's the 3rd best quarterback in this conference?
I 100% could see it, just because, you look at what the base was last year. Again, I know he took some lumps, and when it rained, it poured.
Mm-hmm.
The game that comes to mind is the game in Baton Rouge where they're about to retake the lead, and he throws that pick in the end zone, and it all just sort of spiraled from there, and the season kind of, to an extent, spiraled from there, losing 5 of 6 to end the season. But for a first year in a completely new offense, he was 19 for most of last year. He did pretty well, and historically under Kiffin, quarterbacks have really taken a jump in year 2. I'm an SC guy. Matt Barkley was his first quarterback at SC. Year 1, he threw 26 touchdowns. Year 2, it was 39. The completion percentage went up about 5 or 6%. Matt Corral's first year under Kiffin, he was a turnover monster. I mean, everybody remembers the Arkansas and the LSU games. He was as good of a caretaker of the ball his last year as anybody in college football. So I think if you look at what this offense is going to be, they're going to run the ball. We know that. Quinshon Judkins is as good as it gets. Jackson's a really good runner, too. And I think that element, keeping teams on their defenses on their toes, I think that he's more comfortable. He sounds more comfortable. Everybody just had really good things to say about him this spring, not just from the X's and O's perspective, but just kind of taking the bull by the horns. And when you bring in guys at your spot, you can either sit and pout, or you can take the challenge. And everybody said that Jackson's really taken it well. And so I think, it's always hard to know what the numbers will look like, but I wouldn't be surprised if he has a really nice year because, one, I think he's really, really talented, and two, Lane Kiffin tends to put quarterbacks in a really good spot.
Oh, yeah. Now, is this the one that reported Lane going to Auburn? No, I'm just kidding.
Brother, that was a fun week.
Oh man, I'm messing with you. I listened to Lane in there, and it was kind of a breath of fresh air for some of the coach speak we've heard this week. Clearly, he's trying to get a couple things out there: the NIL, the 2 transfer portals. Let me ask you, knowing Lane, if you could. If he could pick one right now, would he want the NIL taken care of, or would he switch back the portal to one window and make it a little bit easier there?
That's a really good question. It's always dangerous to try to get in the mind of anybody, but I would probably say the NIL thing, just because. The term free agency has come up a lot with Lane, and I think we all remember his salary cap comments in regards to another school in this conference last year that happens to be in Texas. I think that, if that got sorted out, I don't think the rest of it manifests itself the same way, because then it's just guys looking for playing time and that kind of thing. I think the NIL, and he said it, he is in support of players getting paid. That's never been the issue. It's not equal because not every school is playing with the same budget.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone asked him to power rank boosters in the SEC today, and I almost lost it. It was an incredible question, and his answer was, I'm not going to do that, but God, I wish I could. It was just absolutely amazing. But I think the fact that there are disparities depending where you are, and Oxford's, Ole Miss has done a really nice job with its collective. I mean, there's no doubt about that. That's a really growing thing, but especially when Texas and Oklahoma come in here, that's going to be really tough to compete with. And so, again, it's hard to know where he would land on that one, but I really think that if the NIL thing is regulated or I don't know, just has some more structure, I think the portal stuff would kind of take care of itself.
Yeah. Would he be saying that, though, if Ole Miss had the top boosters? I mean...
No, and again, that's a really good point. Yeah. I'm sure if you have the best boosters, you probably love this because you're like the Yankees back in the day when you could just buy everybody.
Absolutely,
it's the Dodgers, and you're the team that if you can afford it, why wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think it really does depend where you stand.
Yeah.
Now, Judkins, all Ole Miss fans know what a dynamic player he is. I don't know if the country really recognizes how great of a player he is. I know Heisman is not only is it incredibly difficult for any player, but particularly a running back to be in contention. The last running back, I believe, that won it, Derrick Henry.
Yeah, that was so long ago now.
Who was his coach? Who was his OC? Lane Kiffin. Before that, Amari Cooper. I mean, Kiffin will force feed the beast on the team, and the beast is Judkins. So I'm not sitting here saying he'll win the Heisman, but what will it take for Judkins to be a Heisman finalist this fall?
It's really funny that you bring that up because when he has this playmaker, he's going to do whatever he needs. Because at SC, when I was there, Marquise Lee won the Blitnikoff, and he had like 110, 20. It was an insane amount of catches because he was the best player. You give the best player the ball, and Judkins is, and Lane has said it, there's no doubt he's your alpha. He's your guy. Like you said, it's so hard for running backs unless you are on, like Derrick Henry was amazing, but Derrick Henry was also on like the best team in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Unless Ole Miss is in that stratosphere, like the New Year's Six conversation, I don't know if it's going to be possible because, he could put up 2,000 yards, but I don't know if it'll really matter in the national spotlight, if that makes sense. I think he's as good as anybody.
Let's say he gets red hot in a game against a Georgia, against an Alabama, LSU. Maybe not win the Heisman, but do you think he's good enough for in a one-game situation to carry them to a massive upset this fall?
Absolutely. He almost did it a couple of times last year. I mean, Alabama, that game, he's the reason they almost scored the go-ahead touchdown, and there were questions about the play calling towards the end because he wasn't in the game on the last part of that drive because they were down some ball carriers, and he was tired.
Yeah.
And they started throwing the ball, and it didn't work out on that last drive, and the coulda, shoulda, woulda about, your best player just got you here. Why wouldn't you keep giving the ball? I think in those situations this year, there's no question they're going to keep feeding him in those moments. I think he's dynamic, and I think the thing this year too is, and we saw this a little bit in the spring. I know it's dangerous to look at spring football as like anything of note, but
especially for Kiffin.
Yes,
I mean, he's just let's light up the damn scoreboard.
No, exactly, but. He was catching the ball,
yeah.
and I think that's a big thing too. Is just diversifying the way that you get him the ball. And he talked about a little bit today. Yeah, you talk about pass protection and footwork and stuff, but he mentioned running routes, not just out of the backfield. And again, Lane doesn't ever want to compare him to this guy, but he brought up Reggie Bush from year 1 to year 2 in terms of in your first year you are sort of. A running back is just trying to figure out like what to do, where to be, where to line up. In year 2, you can let him do different sorts of things, and that's what Reggie did at SC. And I think they're excited for Quinshon to be able to do more things.
Don't you hate that though? I mean, when I think of a Heisman candidate, a true Heisman candidate, it shouldn't be because he's on a national championship team or that their team's undefeated. I always think if you remove Judkins from that program last year, that record's not as good as it is.
Right.
That's an MVP for me. And do you think we ever? I mean, because that's one of the things. If I could fix, I would fix because these ballots coming in and late September, 1st of October. I mean, that's ridiculous.
C.J. Stroud won the Heisman for somebody.
Do you think he'll ever change?
No, and that it sucks because I think part of it too is. I'm a West Coast guy. We don't stay up that late for all of the games,
right?
And even it's vice versa too. With if there's a good player on the West Coast,
good point.
Caleb Williams was able to, he was in the spotlight at SC and stuff, but a lot of people didn't get to watch his games, and so I think it's going to be hard. I can't remember the last time like a player that wasn't on like a top 10 New Year's 6 team won it. Like even Tebow won it. That wasn't one of the better Florida teams, but they had just won the championship and they won it the next year. So it's like it's Florida. They're going to be fine.
Well, he mentioned Henry, and I was just thinking of Mark Ingram. Here's a guy that had
Toby Gerhart.
Similar.
Hey, California legend, please.
Similar stats to Judkins last year, and we're not like, oh yeah, by the way, he should be a Heisman man.
Yeah, no, it's true. I think if you're looking at, I don't think there's any metric that wouldn't say that he is one of the top 2 or 3 running backs in the country. I know Michigan's got a great one. I know Rocket Sanders is a superstar. You can't tell me that there's many guys better than Quinshon Judkins.
Now, much is made about the Pete Golding hire, of course, upgrade at defensive coordinator. I don't have any doubt about that. But players matter more than coaches. I mean, Nick Saban could take over Vanderbilt. He could have Josh Heupel as his OC and Kirby Smart as his DC. Vanderbilt ain't winning the SEC next year because they don't have the players. So does Ole Miss right now have the defensive personnel with Golding coaching them to at least not be such a blatant weakness for the team? Can they take that next step to help the overall team be competitive?
Yeah, and so I look at the team the year before when they had that DJ Durkin, Chris Partridge defense, but Durkin was calling the plays. Like, no one's going to pretend that defense was like incredible.
Yeah.
But it was good enough. It got the job done. And I think, like, realistically, that's, when you're going to score points, I think the way that they think they're going to score points, would you love a top 5 defense? Yeah, of course. But you just need to be able to stop the bleeding because there were times when, I saw Arkansas run for 4 billion yards against them. I saw, the air raid tear them up on the ground. Over the last stretch of the season, they were giving up 35 points a game. I saw a really bad Auburn team run it down their throats. I mean, it was bad. They got in some shootouts they probably shouldn't have been in.
Yeah.
And so I think that, Golding, I know depending on if you're a Bama fan or an Ole Miss fan, you're really excited that he either left or that he's your guy now. I know Nick Saban's always spoken really highly of him, but I know some fans had some, maybe thought the defense should have been better. But I think Ole Miss fans are really excited because he's an established name. People know him. He's a great recruiter.
Mm-hmm.
And two, there's always been questions about, like, how invested is Lane, right? Every year we play the song and dance. Last year it got very, very loud. We were dancing a lot. They invested a lot in P. Golden. That's a lot of money. That he's trying to build that. And so I think that, listen, again, Willie Anderson's not on Ole Miss. He's not, and neither is Kool-Aid McKinstry. It's just you don't have those guys. They're getting better. The portal's helped. It's how you fill in gaps, and the recruiting has gotten better. I think Suntrain Perkins is going to be a superstar. But I think it'll be better.
I really like the linebacker they got from Louisville,
Monty Montgomery. He's a really nice player, and so if you look at like the caliber of the player that was here a couple years ago to where it is now, there's no doubt that it's better.
Yeah.
But is it up to the standard of, like, are you going to be Georgia and Athens with that team? I don't know. And I think you could have, the best defensive coordinator. You have Bill Belichick running that defense, but if you don't have the dudes, it doesn't necessarily matter. And so I don't know if they're quite there yet to have that sort of a defense, but I think they're going to be significantly better.
Yeah.
Well, last thing I got for you, Mike. Where will you be voting Ole Miss? Because I think that's the toughest thing in the West. I mean, you could convince me you could tell me Ole Miss is going to be last, and that's not where I got them, but I would buy it. You could tell me second or third, and I could see a path to that too. They're a tough team to read. Where will you be voting Ole Miss in the West?
I think I was very brave for putting LSU number one.
Yeah. That's where I'm at.
I'm so brave. I think I had Bama, and I am actually I'm going to regret this. I'm high on A&M. That's never turned out bad for anybody. I think I had them fourth. It's kind of a toss-up with them in Arkansas for me, just because Arkansas is always kind of a hard team to get a grasp on too, because they're kind of inconsistent. One week they look like a top 10 team, then another week not so much. But I think they're right now a middle of the division team. I don't think that's a bad thing, but I think there's a lot of moving pieces in the middle of that division. Like I could talk myself into Auburn, if things go right, being number 4, because it's Hugh Freeze. He's a good coach. They've got some talented guys. Like you could talk me into it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of teams I could talk myself into right below Bama, LSU, and Bama. Like anything after that, I wouldn't be surprised. And I think Ole Miss is one of those teams that, if the defense just does better, they're going to be in a pretty good spot. They could go anywhere from the third place team to down on the bottom. Again, it's what makes covering this team so entertaining, because I have no idea what it's going to be. People ask me, I'm just like, man, if I knew that, I'd be buying lotto tickets.
Yep. All right, before you go, tell the audience, where can they find you?
You can find me, for better or worse, on Twitter.com at Michael L. Katz, Katz, and at the Daily Journal's website, djournal.com.
All right, now we're going to round it out here. Finish the week, these Mondo shows, SEC Media Day rewinds. We got 2 kind of SEC-themed ones, so we're going to hit on a lot of teams here with J.D. Pickall from On 3. First time on the show. Really, really appreciated J.D. He was probably the nicest guy at Media Days. I got to hand it to him. He was a hell of a nice guy. Really appreciate J.D. giving us time. And we got some things cooking. He may be back on the show before long. So I think you guys are really going to appreciate this.
You got me? I got you loud and clear. I got you, Mav.
Okay. All right, we're here with JD Pickall, I'm sorry, from On 3, first time on the show. Wanted to have you on for a long time. How's it going, JD?
Man, I'm fired up to be on here with y'all. Been following y'all for a long time. Y'all do tremendous work, so it's a blast to be here with y'all at SEC Media Day.
Yeah, and it's wild. We were talking.
I'm just curious how many people run up to him and think your cousin Shane, and then they're like, "Oh wait, no, no, that's not him."
A couple of times. I got Grant Firking today. Someone thought I was Grant Firking. I was like, "Man, that's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me." So, but if I get called cousin Shane, that would then trump that compliment. So
Okay.
I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
We've had so many people from On 3, and we just look around, and maybe it's because it's Nashville-based, but I mean, it seems like you guys are taking over.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel very fortunate to have my wagon hitched to Shannon Terry. I will say that much. I mean, just it feels like everywhere I look, whenever I'm at something like the SC Media Day or the NIL event, just the team that he has assembled, I feel very, very fortunate to be a part of. And, excited for what the future holds.
And it's just going to keep getting bigger and better. You know what?
Yeah, I believe it. I believe it, man. If history is our teacher, I believe it. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think his vision and the way that he just attacks the execution side of things is inspiring and obviously encouraging to be a part of.
Yeah, and you're just like me. We were talking earlier with someone. Man, these Mississippi State fans, I don't know if you're catching it, but they are mad as hell because you've got them last in the West too, right?
Got them last, man. I mean, somebody's got to be last, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's got to be last. And I think I saw your prediction and I was like, for a little bit, like you read your mentions enough, you're like, man, I'm going crazy. Like I must be the only person that is seeing this. And I see, I'm like, all right, SC Mike's got it, Cousin Shane's got it. So yeah, man. I mean, it's so tricky in my mind to go from being in that air raid philosophy.
Yeah.
They lose double-digit guys to the portal, and now they're changing their philosophy. It's like asking a cross-country runner to go lift weights. It's like, hey, it might take some time. You might get there, but like right now, this probably isn't the way that it's going to work.
But don't you think it's more about not so much Mississippi State being bad? It's just that second half of the West is just
it's brutal.
Yeah,
it's brutal, man.
Like somebody has to be there. Well, somebody's going to be toward the top. So would you be blown away if Mississippi State was, let's say, the third, fourth best team in the West?
No, it wouldn't blow me away, and I think the margins, too, are so thin when you just look across the SEC. I mean, we thought LSU had a chance at the college football playoff towards the end of last year, and they just get rolled up on by Texas A&M. And I was talking with somebody earlier. I think it's just a testament to the league and the talent across the board and the coaches across the board. Like, you got to bring it every single week, otherwise you're on the wrong side of things. So it wouldn't surprise me, but I think just as we stand right now in July, there's a lot that I don't love about Mississippi State roster-wise. So.
And I don't know about you, but for me, when we're doing these projections, I mean, who in the heck knows? And that's the most fun part of it. Because if I knew exactly how it was going to break down, I probably wouldn't watch football.
I'm going to Vegas.
Right.
I'm going to Vegas. I'm cashing in, man. I'm getting an island somewhere.
But for me, when I do these projections, it's largely based on unknowns. What is known and what is unknown. And to me, Mississippi State is, yes, they bring back a lot of experience, but not in this system, not with this coaching staff. So it's just so hard to predict what they're going to do on the field.
No, without question. I mean, I think that's why we love it so much, right, is every single Saturday there's so much variance, so much parity. And we got 18 and 22-year-olds deciding this thing, and we're trying to predict it as best we can in July, and it's like, man, I don't know, roll the dice. I mean, heck, TCU was playing for a national title last year. They missed a bowl game the year before. Yeah. It's like, brother, if we knew, we would not be having this kind of event, and we would probably not all have jobs. So I'm grateful that there is the variance and the parity. But, yeah, it's
hell, there's 5 teams. We don't even know who the quarterback's going to be.
Right?
Like,
and some of those teams, they don't even know who their quarterback's going to
exactly.
be. So, but, yeah, it's always fun in July. You just step into the batter's box, take a few swings, and, find out if you made contact in November.
If the SEC is going to produce a team like that TCU from last year, maybe not quite there is probably one that didn't make a bowl that could make a run like that. Who is that? And I think I just led you into it.
No, I think A&M is definitely one of those teams. Just, I mean, from the way they're built, I mean, from the 4 and 5 stars they have on that roster, everybody kind of wants to poke fun at what happened last year. Right. I mean, it's fair. It's definitely warranted. I mean, to have that much talent and to underachieve the way they did, I think all the punchlines are fair. But to the exact same token, like, hey, you poke that bear. If they get things figured out now with Bobby Petrino, like we may be having a different conversation here later in this season. And to me, the thought process for me is like, it's like a chiropractor appointment bringing in Bobby Petrino. It's like, man, you don't feel so good. It's like, I don't know how I'm going to walk. And then you go in there, you get a little alignment, and you're good to go. So that might be Texas A&M. Another team that I'm curious why they're not getting more buzz. The way we talked about Kentucky last year with Will Levis and all the NFL hype he had, and I'm looking at Devin Leary, I'm like, man, from a resume standpoint, he's thrown for more touchdowns, more yards, less interceptions. If you look at their best seasons, and I'm like, man, give Devin Leary some more of that Will Levis treatment. You know what I'm saying?
You got Cohen. They got a hell of a receiver room. I think.
Demi Sumo.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll see.
Hey, well, on the flip side of that coin, who should tamper expectations?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I think the boom and bust is so high for me with South Carolina.
Yeah.
Spencer Rattler, so much is made of him, and it's fair too. I mean, the way that he, I don't want to say burned out, but the way that he transitioned out of Oklahoma, I think that lends itself to probably inviting some blame when things don't go right. But I mean, they didn't protect him well last year. He got sacked 31 times, and they couldn't run the ball well last year. They're like 102nd in the country in terms of yards per game. And so I'm like, okay, not protecting him. Yeah. We're not helping him with the run game, but we're going to blame him when things don't go well. So, all right, I mean, that's on y'all. But if they can add some pieces around him.
And throw in a coordinator that's never called a play in college football.
100%. Yeah, so now he's the new coordinator. I mean, the whole situation in South Carolina is fascinating to me. Also, they couldn't stop the run. So there's kind of that, potential for them to go win 8 games, but also if a couple things break differently for them, and if they can't stop the run, maybe a different conversation in November for them as well.
What is South Carolina, man? I mean, did you get that?
What has happened if Georgia does not win the East? How is that even possible?
I think 2 things would happen. I think, one, you see a massive drop-off unexpectedly at the quarterback position. Like Carson Beck is just a version that none of us saw coming. The other thing I think would be they would have gotten away from their offensive identity. And we talked about it a little bit on our show this morning, but they kind of have this formula that's worked for them in the past, and the work this past season. They ran the ball 53% of the time last year, over 200 yards a game. Like, they were and have been the bully. Yeah. And so I'm curious. Temptation's a funny thing. If you don't see Carson Beck out there, throw a couple frozen ropes in practice, and you start to think like, hey, maybe we should go a little more 11 personnel. Maybe we do take a tight end off the field. And I just think that's a slippery slope. And so if for some reason, I'm not predicting this, if they were to miss the college football playoff or not end up in Atlanta, I think something like that would have happened. And I think also you see those teams you talked about with Kentucky and y'all's Tennessee Vols, man. I mean, Joe Milton's got the juice, and I think he ends up being as advertised and more than that if they end up beating Georgia.
Yeah.
What do you think about the Vols? Do you think they can plug and play and keep it rolling under Heupel?
I love Josh Heupel. I love Joe Milton. And I think the interesting thing is that the defense gets so much flack and the secondary so much is made of it, but it's like for how often they were out there, for how many plays they were having to defend, it's like, yeah, those stats may be a little bit more on the higher side when you look at those numbers. So if the secondary can just be improved a little bit and Joe Milton can pick up where they left off last year, I mean, just in terms of what God gave Joe Milton, I don't know if there's another quarterback in the country that has those physical giftings. That's like, right. God might have just kind of spilled a little bit more of that arm talent sauce on him. But, no, man, they've got a lot of potential and a huge boom factor,
and he seems
without
to be
a doubt.
handling the spotlight well. I mean, I was afraid of that. I mean, that's part of a mental game, and I was afraid that was going to get in there. Do you think that plays a role, or do you think he just has embraced that?
I mean, it's so fascinating because you look at his career. I mean, the guy was benched twice.
Yeah.
He came from a big program at Michigan. That there was already that spotlight there. So I'm curious to hear y'all's thought on this when he said, listen, I don't lose in Florida. We're not losing to Florida. I mean, did y'all like that?
No,
I was fired up by that.
Well, I'm not aware of him winning in Florida. So let's pull that back. We were just talking with some your guys over there at KSR. They came over here and they were asking kind of the same deal. And I said, that's an opportunity for Milton for the fan base to turn on him.
Yeah.
Because I don't think Florida's going to be very good.
Yeah.
So if he's running his mouth and he has a multi-turnover game and he's the reason Tennessee's dream season comes shattered. Now, the one game's not going to define you. But if you're losing to Florida, you're probably not going to beat Alabama, Georgia, maybe not even Kentucky on the road, South Carolina. I mean, there's a lot of traps on that schedule. It's almost a must-win, and him opening his mouth makes it even more so in my mind.
Yeah, I get that, but a little bit, it could be a launch pad too. If he does go down there and beats the shit out of the Florida Gators, then all of a sudden we're building statues and we're saying, hey, we're back, baby. We don't need,
A lot of number 7 jerseys are selling there.
Absolutely. So I think it is a pivotal matchup, but it was last year for Hooker, too. I think that game got lost because of all the great games that followed the Tennessee Volunteers, know. But it was that last-second victory that kind of launched Tennessee into that trajectory of, hey, we've made it.
Yeah, going to the swamp now, too. That's going to be something.
What do you make of the Gators? You think Billy Napier – because I just don't – I don't like – I've seen it so many times in the SEC. we're going to do the Alabama-Georgia thing, but we're going to do it. Now, I know he's killing it right now in recruiting, but we're going to do what they do, but we're going to do it with lesser talent. And I realize this class right now is not lesser talent, but they're not there. And last time I checked, guess who's right there with them? Georgia and Alabama. So it's not like they're going to surpass them in terms of talent. I just don't believe in trying to do what Georgia and Bama are doing, and I don't see how that's going to beat them. How are you going to catch up to them and beat them it just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I think the tough part with that is for Georgia and Bama to be on their level, you have had to stack top 3 classes for multiple years in a row. And the tough part is if you're trying to do the Georgia-Bama philosophy, it's probably not going to work on the front end. And so you're telling me you got to have it, a 5-year window to get it done, but those first 2-3 years aren't going to work. Well, college football, you don't get 3 years to figure out how to win. Like, you better win in the first couple of years with the transfer portal now. So I think for Billy Napier in 2023, I'm just curious to see how they're able to lean on that run game, because I think it probably gets looked over a little bit too much. Like, they got 2 of the best backs in the country that averaged over 5 yards a carry. And so if they can run the football and take some pressure off Graham Mertz, like, just everything as a whole will be better in Gainesville. Like, economy is going to boom, weather's going to be better, birds are going to be singing, Graham Mertz will have more open passing lanes, and it'll take the defense off the field. So that really is the foundation that my hope would be built on from a Florida fan. Can we run the football, and can we do it consistently enough to keep the defense to have to commit more resources in that front seven?
What about your concern with the optimism? Because a lot of people are pumped up about this recruiting class for Florida Gators, but what does that look like on your 4th loss or 5th loss? I mean, how many times have these kids turned? I mean, they're kids in high school, and all of a sudden they change their mind. They don't want to be a part of this, because you better damn believe every SEC coach out there is reminding them that he may or may not be on a hot seat. And
throw the portal into that too.
Yeah.
Because as soon as guys get there, sometimes if it doesn't work out, they leave.
Yeah. So how pivotal is it for Napier and company to have a good season? Not a great, but at least a good season.
No, I think you hit it on the head, man. I think it's got to be trajectory. Like, hey, we won 6 games, or we won 7 games. Like, this thing isn't booming. That's why we need you here. Why do we need you to sign on the dotted line here and bring your talents to Gainesville? I think that the one thing that I think about when I talk about this class is I think a lot of these kids understand that Florida's in this kind of transitional period.
Yeah.
And so you would hope that the kids that are committing are saying, okay, we understand that once we get there, like, it's on. But we got to understand that it might be a process. We're going to be a part of that change. And I was a part of that when I played college football. I committed to a team that was 1-9 in the Ivy League in Cornell, and everybody in my class was like, okay, like, we know what we're signing up for here. I mean, we don't have a lot of kids going and playing in the NFL, so maybe it's a different ingredient if you're going to commit to Florida. But it's like, hey, we're coming here to try and turn this thing around and get us back to neutral. So I would hope that's the mindset if you're a Florida Gator commit at this point.
I'm still upset Cornell never sent me an offer, Mike. Where exactly is Cornell?
It's a great question. You ever seen The Office?
Yeah.
Andy Bernard? Yeah, that's the one. Upstate New York.
Okay, it makes sense.
Yeah,
makes sense.
Just outside of SEC country.
What in the hell do you make of Ole Miss? Because that's a team every year. I don't know. I mean, they could be great. They could be terrible. With the flux of the transfer portal king and all, I'm big on Lane Kiffin. I think this is a breakout year for Jackson Dart. We think Judkins may be the best running back in the country.
Yeah.
So there's pieces there. They could surprise a lot of people. Unfortunately for them, they catch Georgia out of the East this year. But what's your thoughts on Ole Miss?
It feels like for them they're a solution at quarterback away from being really dangerous in the West. Like, if they're able to have Jackson Dart progress and be able to take that next step in the RPO system, like, all right, we may have a different conversation. And if I'm an Ole Miss fan, I think there's 2 ways to look at it right now and going into fall camp, because it sounds like Jackson Dart's kind of the front runner. Nothing's been going on during spring to sway that too much, from what I've heard at least. The 2 thoughts are, okay, we brought in 2 cats that couldn't beat out Jackson Dart.
Right.
So we missed in the portal is what you're thinking. Or you're thinking, hey, Jackson Dart now kind of bowed up and found a way to defend his job, and maybe we got something here with Jackson Dart, So bottom line, if there's Darty season going on in Oxford, like, Ole Miss is in a good spot. Because, I mean, like you said, they got Quinshon Judkins. Like, it's a bad dude running the football for you. So I'm excited to see what they are, but they probably still put them below an LSU and below a Alabama in the West, but I think they'll be a factor. They're going to catch somebody. I don't know if they win the West, they're going to catch somebody, though.
Well, Kiffin may have discovered a cheat code. I've heard him say it before. We bring in these transfers, they can't leave. Not without sitting out. So I'm just adding transfer quarterback after they can't leave. They have to stay.
That's right.
Checkmate.
I think that's genius. But what about Missouri? There's a lot of hope and optimism that this could be a turnaround year. we saw drinking here yesterday. He was kind of muted. I think he's trying not to run his mouth because he knows they haven't backed it up yet, and he doesn't want anything he says to be used against him in a court of law here. But do you think Mizzou can, I'm not saying win the East or anything, but show significant signs of progress?
I'm curious about the quarterback position. Cousin Stan, I know you're high on the Zoo, man. I'm curious about their offensive philosophy next year. Is it going to be Brady Cook? Is it going to be Jake Garcia? And it sounds like he's turning over the offense. Hired an offensive coordinator. I think that in itself is a very mature move. And, he's a grown man, so I don't think he needs to worry about being mature. But, that's a very self-aware move to bring in someone else to call the offense when that's kind of been your MO throughout your career. And I don't know about Missouri. The same way that you feel about Ole Miss, I feel about Missouri right now. I'm just curious to see who's playing quarterback and what they look like offensively.
Well, it felt like ownership too when he was out here. Like, hey, this is the time.
Yeah.
We're gonna do it this year, and that's why some folks have him on a hot seat. Do you think if Mizzou falls short, maybe 6 wins, 5 wins, misses a bowl, do you think Eli's the first coach out of the SEC this year?
Man, that's tough. I'm trying to think who else in the SEC could go besides him, but I think if you're looking across the SEC landscape, he's probably the best odds for you if you're betting on someone to get fired. I would be surprised if he were to get fired after this year.
Yeah.
I think they're going to give him some time. I think they understand that at Missouri, what you're up against in the SEC is it's a tough deal, and you got to give someone time to build it up. So if we're having the same conversation, the same time next year, maybe there's different different answer to that conversation.
Yeah.
But no, I think he's probably safe for this year, in my opinion. If they were to make a bowl game.
Yeah. Who did you have first besides Georgia?
Alabama.
Okay, Alabama.
Mm-hmm. Alabama.
So you're wrong too.
No, I'm right there with you.
I love it.
My scenario is that Bama wins out, Nick Saban walks off, into that sunset as what is it? That would officially give him the most championships, right?
I think he's tied with Bear right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So short list.
There you go.
This does happen. Who takes Saban's job?
Wow. Got to look at Dabo, right?
Oh,
you gotta at least see hey, maybe you give him a little text message, get a little FaceTime. I don't know. Hey, Dabo, gonna come play come coach for the alma mater, man. I don't know. That is a tough one.
Yeah,
I think you gotta
Kiffin.
look. Yeah,
it wouldn't be Kiffin, but that would be entertaining to say the least.
That would be a Netflix special.
But who would want it? I see Sark floating around. Yeah. Would you really leave Texas to follow the largest shadow in college football history?
That's tough.
I don't know. I think that job would be sexy and would be exciting, but there's a lot of people that aren't willing to take that because they would be following the great.
And where because you don't go hire the young hotshot who's a coordinator at a Power 5 school.
No.
You got to go for most proven commodity. And that pool in itself, the names that you could draw from, feels pretty limited. But
you wish you could promote from within.
Yeah,
like you had a protege.
You wish
there.
Kirby was still there.
Absolutely,
that's what you wish.
I got the perfect one with Hugh and Auburn. Dan Mullen. Bring back that rivalry. I love Dan Mullen. He didn't get it done at Florida, but all right, JD, I really appreciate your time. One thing before you go, give us your hottest take here heading into the SEC season.
Man.
We need the clips. Come on now.
Man, I tried my best not to be a big hot take guy.
Yeah.
My hottest take for you would be at the end of the season, when it's all said and done, I think Joe Milton's a top 5 quarterback in the country.
Wow.
I think the system itself is set up for him to succeed. I think they're going to let him play to his strengths. I think they got a lot around him. Dante Thornton, Squirrel White. Brew McCoy. Go down the list. They got some dudes now. So I think
McCoy's going to break out.
He's going to be a stud, man. Yeah. So I think when you look across the board, I really like where Tennessee sits, and I like his positioning. Now, is he in New York? We'll see if Tennessee wins enough games, but I think he's going to be a dude.
Cornell kicking in. Getting into my heart right there.
Before you go, JD, tell the audience, where can they find you?
I appreciate it, man. You find us anywhere that you want to consume college football content. We're on podcast, The Hard Count with JD Pickall. We're on the On3 YouTube channel. We're live twice a week. But, no, I appreciate y'all having us on. Y'all do a tremendous job. Y'all are truly one of the voices in this space, and it's a blast to be on with you guys.
Cool.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
All right, so thank you, JD. Really, really great stuff. As usual, if you're not watching his stuff on On3, their YouTube channel, he's got a big-time future in this business, so it was an honor having JD on the show. And last but not least, to round out the week, this guy, I love him. Chad Withrow from Outkick, host of Hot Mic. The points he makes, he's not afraid to hurt people's feelings if it's the truth. Let's kick it over to Chad Withrow talking some SEC. And Shane,
for some reason, wanted to talk NFL with Chad. All right, we're here with Chad Withrow, Outkick, Hot Mike. I was just on set with you about a week ago down at SEC Media Days, but you're still doing your show down the street. You're everywhere, man.
Well, I got to say that Davey Hudson, our producer, really failed you in that interview because I go and do a podcast with you, Mike, and you have a fine bourbon waiting on me when we sit down, and we do a show in a distillery and a place that's a brewery, and we've got nothing for you.
Yeah,
so
I was disappointed.
I blame Davey fully for that decision to not have that set up and ready to go, but we did go grab a beer right after, so that was fun.
Yeah, I wish they'd let us have beers here. I think wouldn't it open up the coaches and we'd get more entertaining comments, don't you think?
We definitely need like a bourbon and ball type session with some of these coaches. I just talked with Zach Arnett of Mississippi State. That is a football type guy. I think he could open up a little bit more with a little bit of bourbon. So, no, I'm with you. I think that'd be a great setup for everyone. Everyone involved would have more fun.
Right.
Let me ask you, out of all the SEC coaches now, who would you want to have a glass with?
That's a good one.
Coach O is always a safe
It would have
answer,
been Mike Leach, right? That's the emeritus answer is Mike Leach of all time. Lane Kiffin would definitely be up there, but I mean I've hung out with Lane Kiffin a couple times, and he's one of those guys. He's so smart that it's almost difficult to hang out with him in a social setting, just a little bit different, right? And he's not exactly his online persona when you're around him. I listened to Kirby Smart today. I think he'd be fun to grab drinks with. Man, it's a great question. I don't know that one name really jumps to the top of mind that would be the guy you want to grab bourbon with. So I'll go, since I just saw him, and I think he's a good talker and he's got a good personality. I'll go with Kirby Smart.
So what now you got us curious. What was it like hanging out with Lane Kiffin? What can you set the scene with, if you can share any of that?
Well, just being around. I don't want to set too much of the scene, but a little bit. Just a dinner setting. He's very intelligent, and one of those guys that he's kind of on another level at times with what he's seeing and what he's thinking. And he's got a very dry sense of humor. He's hilarious on Twitter, right? Hilarious in written form, but when he gives you the quick one-liner, he's not maybe as gregarious as someone would think. That's why he comes to mind for who you'd want to grab a bourbon with, but it's not the first person I would jump to. So I think Kirby Smart is my answer, but I'll get back to you. I'll continue to think about it. Maybe I'll come up with a better answer.
So it sounds like you were at Twin Peaks. Blank if that's true.
Home of the home of the what? Like the 28-degree beer or whatever it is. Yeah, that's the perfect spot for me and Lane to hang out.
Have you picked up anything from all the interviews that maybe you were unaware of heading into SEC Media Days?
So we interviewed Gary Danielson earlier, and I asked him. I started the question by saying, "Are you on social media?" And he just said, I know exactly where this is going. And he said, yeah, I'm aware of some of the backlash, during games, and that I'm an Alabama fan or I favor this team over the other one. And he gave a really good answer. He said, I'm fine. He's like, I played quarterback in the NFL. We lost a lot in Detroit. So I've heard it all. I've seen it all. And I'm not overly active on social media, so it doesn't bother me. But he said, what bothers me about that is after a game, our crew works so hard, and there's so many people involved. And he said all of them will get around and go to see the online reaction. Anybody in the truck, it's all about me. Yeah. Right? He said everything is negative about me. And he said, I hate that once the game is over, it's people hating me and not pointing to the entire broadcast team, not pointing to anything else. But can you believe, Gary Danielson messed this name up, or that he likes Alabama more than Tennessee or whoever they're playing? That was his big takeaway from it, which was an interesting answer. I never really thought of it that way. But he was more concerned about that than anything else.
Which is kind of crazy, this being a transition year with Texas and Oklahoma and all this other stuff that's going on in the background. A lot of people forgetting about CBS final run here. So
hey, I let it off by saying, man, is this bittersweet walking around here? And he kind of laughed. He said, yeah, it's been a little weird because this is the last go-around at SEC Media Days for him. And I asked him, are you going to be the Big Ten Game of the Week voice? And he just said, well, I'm under contract with CBS, so I hope to keep calling college football. That's what I want to be doing, but I don't think they know what's going to happen with that Big Ten game. So I would assume it's going to be the same broadcast crew doing that Big Ten game of the week now also. But, yeah, it's a different era now. And I look around at, ESPN, they're laying so many people off.
Right.
We could sit and compare TV deals when it happened. Big Ten has diversified their portfolio.
Yeah.
They're everywhere now, but they're not on ESPN.
Right.
Well, SEC is only on ESPN for the most part, and ABC. But now when you look at the state of the business and where Disney is in their thoughts of ESPN and where you could be on all of those different networks, who got the better end of the deal? I would argue the Big Ten probably had the smarter deal right now because they're on a number of different platforms. Although, get back to me during college basketball season when there's not a single Big Ten game on ESPN. That's going to be a problem because that's where people go for college basketball.
Right. Have you had to go to any kind of counseling or rehab now that Will Levis is likely the future starting quarterback for the Tennessee Titans?
I've never seen a therapist. Anyone who knows me or has spent any time with me would tell you that I would need to see a therapist before. But that's one that nearly made me call a shrink and go see someone for some help. So we're hosting a party. By the way, you guys are welcome to join. Tomorrow night at 6th and Peabody with Outkick. There's going to be a lot of SEC types there from 6 to 11 p.m. Parmalee, the band's going to play. DJ's going to be there. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'd love to have you guys there. We invited Will Levis to the party. So Hutton has been in contact with Will Levis. He's met him. He knows him. Met him at Topgolf, of all places, with some Titans people. And he says, Withrow, I'm telling you, you'd love this guy. He talked about Step Brothers being his favorite movie. He's got a sense of humor that you would be attached to, that you would like. So I'll give it a chance. So if he shows up at the party, I'm willing to go up and say, look, man, no one in Nashville has been more upset about the Titans drafting you than me. I'll own it right now. But I hear you're a good dude and a funny guy. And we'll see where it goes from there. Maybe I get punched. Maybe he laughs it off. Maybe we can move on in our relationship. But of all the things the Titans needed, having to reach for a quarterback in the second round after reaching on a quarterback in the third round the year before, that was not the quarterback I wanted to see, and that was not the position more than anything else that I wanted to see.
Hey, I know this is SEC football, but I want to ask, what about Hopkins? Are you excited?
I am excited. Now, if we want to go and look at things in retrospect, I think it's easy to say, man, John Robinson should have just paid A.J. Brown.
Yeah.
Because the opportunity cost of having to draft a receiver in the first round, Treylon Burks, with that trade and getting rid of A.J. Brown, combined with now 2 years, $26 million to DeAndre Hopkins, well, you should have just paid A.J. Brown, right? Yeah. You wouldn't have needed that move. But given where they were and what Rand Carthon inherited with that wide receiver room, I love it. It's a big win for Mike Vrabel and Rand Carthon. It's a big win for Ryan Tannehill. Because DeAndre Hopkins is their number one receiver now.
Right.
And Treylon Burks can ease into an eventual number one role as the number two guy. And with Chigakonkwo, who can do some things at tight end and be a playmaker, and then Derrick Henry, of course.
Right.
If the offensive line could just be average.
Yeah.
They were atrocious a year ago. They're going to have a pretty good offense, and we know the defense is good. So I think the Titans elevated themselves from very mid before that move to a team that I think should win the AFC South. Even with Jacksonville's improvement, I think they're a division champion. Now, what does that mean in the playoffs? Probably not much. Because I'm not going to put them against those teams with great quarterbacks. Chiefs, Bills, Ravens even. But Cincinnati's another one in the AFC. It's just a brutal conference. But I do think it's a team that can win that division now. So I like the move.
I haven't heard your reaction yet to NCAA kind of going easy, depending on how you see it, for Tennessee. I just love the fact personally that all the SEC, the rest, they're just up in arms that Tennessee did not get a bowl ban and got off easy. What's your reaction to what the NCAA levied?
I think it's about the best possible scenario for Tennessee and what happened. Now, $8 million is not nothing. That's a big fine. That's the biggest fine in the history of the NCAA. So that's a steep fine, but I do like the rationale they used, and they said, I think that's basically the equivalent of the money they got from the last two bowl games, Music City Bowl and Orange Bowl. Mm-hmm. So they're saying, you played in those bowl games, you did well, fork that money over.
Yeah.
That's going to be the consequence for playing in those games. The scholarship loss is not a big deal because they've already docked themselves 16 scholarships. They'll have 2 more this year. So basically you're looking at playing with 83 instead of 85 players for the next 4 or 5 years. But, I mean, with NIL, they're going to have as many scholarship players as they want. They can go get a 3-star guy from the state of Tennessee that really wants to play for the Vols, and they could be a preferred walk-on, but NIL can pay their way, and they could be on full scholarship. So I really don't think it's been that big of a penalty. But I like what they did, and I would say that about anyone. Punish those that broke the rules and got caught, and not the coaches and players moving forward. If you want to go after the university, fine with that, but I would say that about any other program, not to bowl bans to me with a coaching staff when everyone that had all the wrongdoings happen, when they got fired, doing that to Josh Heupel seems overly punitive.
Right.
So I like where the NCAA landed. I think they got creative with the fine. But, yeah, I think it's good news for Tennessee. Now Josh Heupel can come here tomorrow and say it's behind us. We don't have to answer questions about that in recruiting. We know what it is now moving forward, and that's what they've wanted since they took over in Knoxville.
That's pretty wild. I've never really thought about that NIL scholarship,
Yeah.
I mean, is this happening? I mean.
Well, let's put it this way. Josiah Jordan-James at Tennessee is a starter.
Right.
And has played a lot of basketball, and I think been like an honorable mention all-SEC player or third team at some point in his career. He was technically going to be a walk-on this upcoming year as a fifth-year player. Now, if you think that he's not having his school paid for in some way through NIL, then that's just one example. Now he's on scholarship because the kid who came from Harvard got homesick and left. But that's an example in basketball. But it's going to be very easy to accomplish in football as well.
And what does that do for already so much momentum with Tennessee and Heupel, and they're winning big, the fun offense? Now they have this cloud over them. Does that raise even more the ceiling for what this program can accomplish under Heupel?
I really believe that this year will define the floor for Tennessee, okay? And what I mean by that is this is their first transition from a great quarterback for that offense in Hendon Hooker to another quarterback. And it's going to show if it really matters, right? If you just get in that offense and you're okay at quarterback. Joe Milton has a chance to be better than okay, don't get me wrong. But I think now that we're transitioning between quarterbacks for Tennessee, we're going to see the floor. I think the floor is probably 8-9 wins for this program. I really do, because of that offense. Is the ceiling a national championship? That remains to be seen. I think so. I think they're a team that, with the points they're going to put up and the style they're going to play, they're going to contend for some extended playoff spots when they go to 12 teams.
Right.
So that's what I'm watching for this year. Where does Tennessee fall, or do they fall at all? Is it down from 11 wins a year ago to 9? Is it down from 11 wins to 6 or 7? This will, to me, define the floor for Tennessee. If it's 9 or 10 wins, I think you can probably pencil Tennessee in as a 9 or 10 win team with a chance to go to a playoff once it extends pretty regularly. If not, then we got to reassess.
Do you think NIL really helps? I think people assumed Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State would just dominate that as well. But I would argue Tennessee, A&M, Texas, teams that are dying, the fans that are dying to win again, I think it gives them somewhat of a competitive. It may not be sustained, but I think it gives them an advantage in the NIL world.
I do too. I think the motivation is higher there at some of those programs you mentioned. And I think that Tennessee has been on the cutting edge with the Spire group. And I'm buddies with a number of those guys, and they've done a great job, and they've been very creative. I do think that helps Tennessee, but I also think that Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State will not be outbid.
Yeah.
If they really want something to happen and it comes down to an issue of money, which I don't think that the sole issue of money it's not been as prevalent as some might think with decisions guys are making. But I do think if that was the case, then if the tie goes to the team that's won multiple national championships recently, and it's all about money, Georgia or Alabama is going to be able to bid with Tennessee and those schools also. But I do think that Tennessee being seen as a cutting-edge, top-of-the-line NIL destination with Spire Sports, I think that's helped them in all sports, not just football.
Yeah.
Well, I got to ask you, so last thing for you, Chad, really appreciate your time. You host Hop Mike. Not necessarily the hottest seat now, but who's getting fired first in the SEC? Because I feel like that's a question you love to answer.
I would say Eli Drinkwitz could be in trouble.
Yeah.
If I'm having to guess someone that if it just craters, that could be in some trouble. It's hard to define the expectation level at Missouri, though.
Mm-hmm.
If this was Auburn, as an example, going in, like we knew last year with Brian Harsin, that it would be a very, very hot seat. But I think we're in sort of uncharted territory right now where there's not a lot of programs you can point to easily and say this is definitely going to happen. A&M would be the one.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that contract is such an albatross that you can't – I mean, they are just – that's all they can do is hope.
If Texas
Jimbo
wins the Big
Fisher
12,
and Bobby Petrino,
that buyout's going to get paid quick.
Yeah, it could. And, look, they have the money ultimately to do it. But it's still – it's a difficult situation because they put all their chips in, right?
Yeah.
I kind of think of Scott Frost at Nebraska. The thought was, man, if it doesn't work for Scott Frost here at Nebraska, who can make it work?
Right.
And where do we go from there? That's sort of the thought when they hire a guy who's won a national title and they paid him all that money in Jimbo Fisher at A&M. So I think they're in a tough spot, but I think I've talked to you about this before, Mike. I think A&M's a sleeper team in the SEC West. I think their their ceiling's very high this year for what they can accomplish. So I think everybody's gonna survive. Shockingly, everyone's going to keep their job this year.
All right. Hey, before you go, tell our audience, where can they find your work?
Hot Mic with Hutton and Withrow, Outkick.com. You can watch there. Go to the YouTube page, Outkick Hot Mic. You can find us there, or the Outkick YouTube page. Follow me on Twitter at the Chad Withrow. We're on in Nashville on 94.9 The Fan FM. We're a little bit of everywhere. We're on multiple radio stations. You can find us a lot of spots. So just use the old Google machine, and you'll probably find us quickly.
All right, I appreciate you, Chad. That was great.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right, so that's going to do it for this week's shows. I apologize to anyone that, maybe these are too long. I mean, it's going to take a damn month for a lot of y'all to listen to all this, but wanted to throw out all these great interviews we had at SEC Media Days. Fall camp is here for a number of SEC teams already, and by this time next week, they'll all be in camp, all 14, really 16. We got our eye on Texas and Oklahoma this year too, don't forget. But Cousin Shane, back on the show all next week. We got some exciting things planned. Football right around the corner. A month's time from now, SEC football will be kicking off. We can't wait. Want to say thanks to each and every one of you for hanging out. We'll catch you on the next one.